What's the nuttiest thing that HR discovered that ended a career? We had an employee who'd clock in at the time clock every day and then go home. They'd come back to clock out for lunch and back in after an hour, then they'd come back at the end of the day. It was impressive how long it took the manager to catch on. I had a cousin do that at Walmart for many months. It was almost impressive. There was someone who clocked in at Toys R Us every morning, then drove to their other job, coming back to clock out at 8 hours or so later. It was when Toys R Us are closing. No one caught on. So I used to work at a software company and we kept getting complaints about a nap room being cluttered and trash from the nearby break room being left around in the mornings, so we asked security to do some late evening walkbys to see what was going on. One evening they found a young Asian woman hiding in the nap room. She didn't work there and didn't speak English. It was super weird. It turns out one of the software engineers who worked in the building had purchased a mail-order bride. But here's the kicker. He was already married, so unable to bring his new mail-order bride home, he kept her at the office. I have no idea where she hid during the day, but at night she made a good use of our little nap room. Gotta feel bad for that poor woman. We had a very nice HR lady who absolutely spoiled one of the employees in a wholesome way. He was a young immigrant boy who desperately needed a job. He was about 15. She'd go out of her way to give him rides, encourage management to give him raises, and even made him homemade meals. She eventually found out he was stealing all of their customers' credit card info and running them dry, which is why we'd been receiving so many criminal reports regarding our company. Not only this, but he'd flat out steal their purses and wallets while they were visiting. I'm talking hundreds of thousands mysteriously missing from our customers in a matter of months. It absolutely broke our HR lady's heart when she had to fire him and report him to the police. He was immediately arrested for a large number of crimes and deported. Oh, well, this is just kind of heartbreaking in that it was the one good HR employee in the world who was going out of her way to help out this poor kid. Oh boy. We had like a little privacy room at the job I had. It was meant for personal things that didn't belong in the bathroom, like milk pumping or administering insulin. We had a very small white woman who showed no outward signs of being Muslim, no headscarves, she ate pork fried rice every day, drank at company events, but we can't really judge on that. But she said she needed to do her prayer 5 times a day, and during work hours she'd pray in the privacy room. I wasn't like HR or anything, but my cubicle was right there. Someone was trying to go in to pump and the door stayed locked. The company was very gossipy and I was right there, so I heard it all. After about an hour of waiting, they realized her computer had actually been inactive for over 2 hours. They opened the door and there was immediate yelling and I'm like, what the frick? So everyone was gawking around. There was smack and paraphernalia all around and she was nodded out in the privacy room, like sleeping. They still had to go through this legal process to fire her a few days later, and she still showed up during the days in between. At my old IT job, we were doing inventory of these barcode scanners that they use in the plant. They needed an update installed and we figured we'd do inventory at the same time since we needed to round them all up anyway. Well, we only found about 1/3 of what we were supposed to have. Something missing is to be expected, but not that much. Well, later I found a bunch in a coworker's desk drawers. I didn't think much of it at the time. I ran the updates and put them back. Still looking for them, I found most of our missing stock for sale on eBay when searching them by serial number. I brought this information to my boss. He tells me to close the door. You always know it's going to be a serious talk when they close the door. He tells me, now, you listen here. You didn't see anything if you know what's good for you. I was fired from that job the next month. I still don't actually know what was going on there, but in hindsight, a lot of stuff disappeared. I'd install a bunch of monitors, then go back to that area and find the old monitors were back. I'd unload printers off the truck and then never see them installed. Clearly, it was my coworker and my boss, but sometimes I do wonder if it was bigger than that. Years ago, I was covering as both HR and LP manager for a district in a now defunct retail chain. The stores carried a variety of adult magazines, also now defunct. Overstock for these lucrative and quick-selling products were in a storeroom. There was a very small, for the time, camera in the room. One day, I was reviewing footage at a store and idly watching an assistant manager restock after closing. Then something odd happened. He was taking one copy of each adult magazine, opening it to a photo spread, laying it down on the floor. Soon, there were about 15 mags spread out. He left for a moment and then returned into the view of the camera completely undressed. Then he laid down on the magazines and started rolling around and, well, you can guess what he was doing. I met with him the next day and said, "I need to let you know that there's a camera in the magazine storage area." He stood up and said, "Okay then," and walked out of the store. I ended up putting him in our system as resigned and didn't dispute his unemployment claim when he filed. I went ahead and told the next person who took over the restocking job that a camera was there before he even touched a single magazine. Car dealership. Co-owner of the company had a used car lot he had registered under a friend's name. The big dealership would take in used cars, he'd pay a technician off the books to give it a bad inspection so the car would go to auction. He'd use the other company to purchase the cars for dirt cheap and sell the cars at a huge profit margin. Essentially got our KBB rep fired because she was evaluating trade-ins as being in good condition. But the inspections would all come back bad, so in the company's eyes, she was terrible at her job and paying people way too much for their trade-ins. They started to catch on when they realized close to 40% of all trade-ins were getting poor inspections. So they implemented a system where 2 technicians each did their own inspections. Suddenly, not so many cars were getting poor inspections. It all unraveled when they looked into it deeper and realized every single bad inspection came from one technician. In total, they estimated roughly $400,000 in profit had been stolen from the company over the past couple of years. It was pretty messy. A long time ago, I was an IT contractor working for a large company. There was probably about 20 of us on this one team that were all contracted by an IT staffing firm. It came to light that one of my colleagues had been previously fired as a high school teacher for a scam where he'd go to his student's place of employment, like Target, Best Buy, and steal a bunch of crap in exchange for not giving them good grades. When this happened, it was revealed that the IT consulting firm had not run a background check on any of us. The company we were working for called us into an office and said they needed to do background checks on all of us, and if there was anything to disclose, now was the time. No one said a word. In the next 2 weeks, one guy was let go because he'd done time for mail fraud, another guy for attacking his ex, another guy for getting kicked out of the military for attacking a senior officer, and another guy who was a former cop who it turned out was under indictment for allegedly using his power to do some completely obscene acts. That was an interesting month. My God, you had the real-life equivalent of the rogues gallery working in your office. I have to wonder if the author here was the one non-dangerous ground-level employee there and realized that he was in massive danger. Also, if you're wondering how these people get hired, another person provides a great answer. You'd be surprised at how many companies' background checks process consists of either not actually doing it or completely ignoring the results. I've had an HR person dead serious claim their job was to make sure the background check was completed and that they didn't actually have to look at it or take any actions. Turns out 100% always get completed, but some get completed with major issues. But apparently that was all not HR's job. I had a story of a guy using an unmarked company car to run Uber Eats and DoorDash all day. He got away with it for a couple of years. He finally got caught because he was using his work phone for Uber and his data was astronomically higher than anyone else in the company. If he had just used his personal phone, he'd probably still be going. Apparently my predecessor did something similar. Working a construction and maintenance job where we were regularly just waiting for something to happen at one of the sites we were responsible for maintaining, and this guy just went out and did Uber Eats and DoorDash for most of his shift. That probably would have been fine if he'd had even a bit of sense about it and only done it when we were in our periods of fairly frequent downtime. But we worked in pairs and this guy apparently just showed up on time, always looking at his phone, and even when we had minor or major work to do, he'd just frickin' leave his partner and go do orders and come back like an hour or so later. We had a bunch of days where we'd finish as much as 6 hours early, and he could have absolutely made tons doing delivery and being on call, but nope. This guy was committed to just not doing almost any work for the job that, and this is what blows my mind, paid generally higher without any overhead costs so that he could continue with the door dashing simultaneously. Oh, I have two. This one guy kept watching adult material on his work computer, which was partially in view of other people. He was warned to never do it again. He was an excellent employee, but that's a fireable offense. He did it again. They mounted a camera right behind his desk and told him they were going to monitor him from now on. He did it again. They had no choice but to fire him. Another time, someone was looking for something in this new guy's desk drawer. He'd only been there a couple of months, and they found hundreds of little pieces of paper, each with an offense detailing when someone made him angry. Some of them made it clear the notes were instead of hurting people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Previous HR manager was alright, smart, friendly with everyone, good people skills. He was even an adjunct professor during my last year in college, taught behavior modification and abnormal psychology. Then his wife divorced him for attacking her. He went off the proverbial cliff, started calling young, attractive girls from the lab into his office over the intercom, told them he was obsessed with them and offered them all the expense-paid trips to nearby music festivals, promised them free substances, whatever they wanted. They all turned him down. One girl received a decent settlement. He was immediately fired when they found out, of course. He spent the last few years trolling around our college town trying to bang anything that would give him the time of day. It's outwardly obvious he's on hard substances. Multiple stalking and direct attack charges, banned from 24 local businesses, absolutely unhireable anywhere serious ever again. My husband was the de facto IT person in his small company. The company had a nationwide sales force, and the salespeople would come into the office every couple of months for meetings, among other things. So when one of the Midwest sales guys, John, came in, he gave his computer to my husband and said, "Hey, it's been really sluggish. Can you take a look at it and see if something's wrong or if you can get it to run better?" And my husband said, "Sure, I'll take a look." Well, long story somewhat shorter, it was running slow because the memory was filled with adult images. So he reformatted the computer, which removed all of the offensive material, and it was working just fine. John came back in to get the computer, and my husband was like, "Hey, your computer was filled with a lot of non-work-related files, and that's what was slowing it down. So I reformatted it, and it's working great. I'd really suggest getting a personal computer for your personal files, as this is a work computer connected to our work network, and we strongly discourage personal files on any work-owned equipment. Laptops have really come down in price, and by the end of today I'll email you some links for some that are really good quality computers at reasonable prices, so you can have one for personal use." John just kind of brushed him off, gave a brisk thanks in passing, grabbed his computer, and left. My husband sent John the email with the links, and that was that. However, 3 months later, on a Friday, same situation. John comes in, computer isn't working, and it's filled with the exact same sort of stuff. So basically, my husband feels that John was given his chance and now the gloves are off. He goes to the company president, explains what was going on, and shows her a sampling of what was found on the laptop. John was fired that afternoon. I can't even wrap my head around that level of stupidity. He was given a get-out-of-jail-free card and basically just spit on it. You can't save people from themselves, I guess. And he probably had the nerve to think that this was literally anyone else's fault but his own. I won't begrudge anyone being into that kind of material as long as nobody's being exploited, but you've also kind of got to be discreet about that sort of thing, especially in a professional context. My wife's in HR. She recently had to handle the firing of an employee because a federal background check revealed he was some kind of local substance kingpin with an active court case. What's insane is that he was actually working this low-level service industry job. My friend worked IT support for a hospital. They have the ability to remote desktop into employees' laptops, even without authentication from the user, but this was only supposed to be done under special circumstances. I had an urgent ticket which required a remote login, but the doctor was completely unreachable, so he ended up just connecting to the laptop. Turns out the doctor was watching adult material at that very moment, and he immediately logged out, hoping nothing would come of it. Apparently the doctor reported the situation, landing them both in trouble. A guy got caught smoking green herb in the bathroom. He only got fired because he had it on the premises. If he'd said, "I'm taking a quick break," or had just disappeared to his car for 2 minutes, took a few hits and come back inside, he would have been fine. He'd been there for 20 years up to that point. It came to my attention after a few times that a woman would stay in a restroom stall and take all of the toilet paper off the rolls by just unraveling it. And she was seen putting what she had rolled up into her locker a few times. She claimed she was too poor for women's hygiene products, so she was told that they were provided and there was no need for her to use that much TP for that. Hoped that was the end of it, and then it started again, and she claimed this time it was for wounds and that she couldn't afford gauze and wound dressings. Okay, we just told her again that she could use what was in the first aid kits. Management really wanted to be gentle, so it starts up again and she confessed she just likes stealing things and this was easy. She was termed after that one. One of the salespeople had printed off their new offer of employment from a direct competitor on a company laptop, on a company printer, and then just forgot that the paper was there. She wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. All of her stuff got immediately locked, and she'd also tried to download the whole client database and sent it as an attachment from her work email to her private one. All this happened in one day. There was a guy interviewing for an engineering position at the company I worked for. Being from out of state, he flew in the night before. Around 2 a.m. the day of the interview, the HR manager's cell phone rings. It's the interviewee asking if she'd bail him out of jail. He had been arrested for getting into a fistfight with a working girl in the bushes at some park. They had a dispute over payment due for the services given. He was fired before hired. Not HR, but my coworker went to work for a competitor and then never quit her job with us. She traveled for work and was able to work both jobs for months. Lasted until a customer mentioned he'd heard she'd left our company and asked who his account rep would be. When I worked for the federal government, one of our senior managers was dating 2 women that were his contractors. They lost the contract to a competitor. Not losing to want his harem, he demanded the company hire them. They said, no, and he cancelled their contract in retaliation. They sued, and the truth came out. Our CIO demanded he quit. He said he was a disabled veteran and she couldn't fire him. He literally told her to go F herself. He ended up just getting moved. Not fired, not demoted, they just moved him out of IT. He still works at the company. This one guy was hiring working girls and dealing substances on his night shift. The guy admitted to everything. We found out because he had to give someone else his work phone, and a pimp kept leaving messages demanding money. You know, in my time, I've seen a lot of wild stuff, but people in HR were the wildest. Our HR generalist was pregnant. The father was one of the people on the production floor, but she didn't know which one. Fistfights broke out amongst all the potential fathers. HR VP was fired after a paid conference he attended was actually just a free vacation for him and his family. He didn't even go to the same city as the conference. HR director was having an affair with the IT director. Both of them were married. When they were confronted, they both denied it, so they were both fired. I saw them 7 years later on a plane coming back from Europe. Still together. I was the IT guy who involved HR. If you want to sell your homemade adult movies, at least use your personal email instead of your work email to do these dealings. Now, I have to say that in these later stories, there seem to be a lot of employees who just can't stop watching, or in this case, making, these films at work. Come on, people, this is like the one thing that you know you can't get away with, surely. My dad was working as HR in the construction industry. The story that stands out the most, they had a guy taking a crap in another fella's backpack. I worked at a recruiting agency, had a candidate with an interview lined up, big biker machinist, couldn't get a hold of him to set up. Finally, we got hold of his girlfriend. She had kicked him out. She informed us he got fired from his previous job because he threw his boss into a dumpster. Like WWF style. I was envious, but I still put him on the do not call list. Fired a guy for selling poor quality adult material DVDs. Long story short, someone brought one of the DVDs on eBay and was dissatisfied with the quality, so they called the number listed as the contact info for the seller. He called and demanded to speak to the president of the company. He was transferred to the president of the company and let the president know how upset he was about the quality of his movie. This was a manufacturing company. The guy had listed the company address and the main phone number as his seller contact info. I did some repair work in a food production company. One of the employees there told me a funny story about a guy that got fired. This guy would come in every day, clock in, do a bit of work, then disappear. It took a while for anyone to realize he wasn't working, as this is a big facility and no one could figure out where he was going. He wasn't leaving the building either. This was apparently a mystery for a while. Finally, it was discovered he'd somehow got his hands on a copy of the elevator service key, and he was running the elevator part way up, stopping it, opening the doors and climbing into the space below the elevator car. Elevators have a crawl space below them for maintenance. He apparently slept down there and then went out before the end of his shift, did a bit of work like nothing was wrong, and then went home. He didn't get fired, but in the days of MSN Messenger and Outlook pop-ups on Windows XP, a pop-up showed up as a co-op student was chatting to a friend on his work desktop, so the message was intended for a friend. What happened was that an email came in with a quick reply, which captured his message and sent it to the company. I'll summarize the email. The lunch lady is sick and won't be here today. And the co-op student's response, "Sorry, it slipped out, just like me out of your mom." He was petrified when he realized and went to his boss's office. They sent him home for the day and he sent an apology email the next day.
Redditors who grew up filthy rich. What did you think was normal till you learned otherwise? Honestly, it was the little things. I knew we had nicer cars than average, a bigger house, went on more trips, etc., but I thought everyone's refrigerator had wood-paneled cabinet doors. For example, we had a Sub-Zero built-in refrigerator and freezer. The first time I saw a metal fridge, I thought it was weird, and I thought it was even weirder that the fridge and freezer were combined. But then I got really jealous because you could put magnets on it. I also thought everyone had a central vacuum system where you can sweep dirt into a little hole under the cabinets by the floor and it sucks it up. We had these little holes all over in every room, stuff like that. Yeah, we had those and a bunch of other crap I thought was normal but was not normal. We had touchscreen TVs that controlled the HVAC, security, and lights and sound system before touchscreens were even a thing. I'm talking mid-1990s. It wasn't even a flat screen. It was a deep dish TV with a touchscreen. I had personally never heard of a central vacuum system in all my 27 years on this planet, but now that they've explained what it is, I do believe I have in fact seen them. And they sound cool as hell. I would totally have one. However, on the topic of refrigerators, I will never be surprised at the lengths humanity will go to preserve and refrigerate food, and frankly, the sky's the limit with refrigerator technology. At least until we get Mr. Freeze-Ray from the Batman. Probably a weird example, but growing up, all of our dishes were made of fine china, Waterford glassware, etc. And I just thought that's what plates and stuff were made of because we didn't have anything else. Then one time I went to a friend's house for dinner and we ate on colored plastic plates and non-matching plastic cups. I just thought that was the weirdest thing ever and asked why we were eating with camping dishes. That's kind of rude, but when I was a kid, I didn't have a filter either. I just said whatever came to mind. I myself am not rich, but I have an uncle who is very well off. So one of my not rich aunts was complaining about her car acting up on her. Well, my cousin from the rich family was listening and got really confused. So he just asked her, well, why don't you just get rid of it and go buy another one? This kid was probably 13 or so at the time and had no concept of not enough money. He couldn't understand why you wouldn't just go get a new something if your old something didn't work.
Oh, to be young and naive and not understand how disposable income works or the value of it.
I would say rich in the area by comparison. I think the moment it really sunk in was during 5th or 6th grade, around middle school. I felt like I was getting too cool for little kid parties, so I decided I wanted to go somewhere and do something fun. My parents were super excited about this, since it meant I was taking one stupid middle schooler with us on a mini trip instead of having 15 stupid middle schoolers in the house. I decided on a trip to some festival, which meant a ferry ride and then drive to a Canadian city and have a big fancy meal. The girl I picked had been my friend for years. I had no idea her life was so different. She lost her mind on the ferry. It was so fun. She had never seen Canada before, so we stopped and took her picture. My parents, realizing immediately that this was a huge deal for this girl, bought her and I souvenirs, which she later gave to her mom since her mom has never left the area. My mom would not let her order the cheapest thing on the menu, which I never realized is something poor children are trained to do. I thought you could just pick whatever you wanted to eat. She was the first person in her family to travel more than 30 miles from her house. This was pre-9/11, when a family could just take a random child with no ID and a permission slip from their parents into another country. We are both adults now and occasionally run into each other. She's married with 4 children and still talks about the time we rode a ferry and went to Canada. Had she not brought it up, I probably would have forgotten. It's probably just the words they used, but there's something about the way this individual writes that rubs me the wrong way. I don't know if they intended to, but yeah, whatever. I lived overseas for a year when I was in high school and attended an international school where, though my family was decidedly middle class in the US and my dad was being paid several times more to work abroad than he had been at home, I'm fairly certain my family were the least well off in the entire school. None of these kids ever seemed to realize how fabulously wealthy they were. A few examples. Several boys from North Korea. I don't know exactly how high up in the political world of the DPRK you need to be allowed to send your children abroad for an education, but these kids showed up to school in brand new Benzes for a start. One friend of mine lived in a luxury high-rise in the single richest enclave of the city where I lived. His parents lived on the 16th floor. Each floor was a single unit. He lived on the 17th floor, in his own unit. He had his own live-in maid and driver as well. Another friend's parents ran the largest import and export company in the country. He had 2 bodyguards and was driven around in his own armored bulletproof SUV. Windows were 2 inches thick and didn't roll down. I attended his birthday, which was on his dad's 180-foot super yacht. It was not uncommon for my friends to spend 3-day weekends in Bali, the Maldives, or wherever their vacation homes happened to be. I'm still friends with several of them through social media, and the most frequent post I see from several of them is off to blank for the week, then on to blank and blank, those locations almost always being on 3 separate continents. Rich North Koreans, I never thought I'd hear those words put together unless they were following up Kim Jong-un. My father was a successful chemical engineer/manufacturer and private pilot. I spent my childhood in a gated flying community with a fully functioning airport. Not only did we have a garage full of your everyday vehicles, we also had an airplane hangar full of classic cars that my daddy enjoyed restoring. World War II era warbirds as well as the modern 2-engine planes he used to fly to business meetings. We own property in Nantucket and St. Martin, and we're constantly taking extemporaneous vacations. John Travolta would walk over from time to time and shoot the breeze with my dad in our hangar up until he made Pulp Fiction and was slingshotted back into relevancy. I remember having playdates with his son, Jet, was also family friends with well-known NASCAR drivers and would spend a lot of time at their mansions hanging out with their kids, driving around on golf carts and shooting paintball guns. Everyone I knew had airplanes, nice cars, big homes, and what seemed like an endless supply of wealth. That was my normal. When I was about 4 years old, I made a new friend at school and was invited to spend the afternoon over at his house. It was an eye-opening experience, to say the very least, and when I returned home, still very confused, I remember saying something along the lines of, "Mommy, they live in a really small house and they don't have an airplane hangar." My mother was slightly horrified at the realization that this was my reality and had to explain to me that not everyone has the same things that we have. Life has changed a lot for me since the 90s. When I moved away for college, my dad suffered a series of mini-strokes which subsequently caused progressive dementia. Towards the end, he couldn't even tell you what year it was. My father passed away in January, and I've been spending a lot of time recently looking through old photo albums and listening to stories. Maybe that's why I felt compelled to share all of this with you guys. Being rich is nice, don't get me wrong, but I would give it all back in a heartbeat just to spend a little more time with the dad I used to know, the man who was the master of his own universe. There was still so much to learn from him, but what I'm left with are the cherished memories of my childhood that will forever put into perspective just how lucky I really was. Rocking it out with John Travolta post-Saturday Night Fever, flying planes? That sounds like the life to me. I've actually flown a plane once before. Other than that, sorry about your dad, mate.
One, I thought every family had staff. We had a chef, gardener, chauffeur, 2 nannies, handyman/errand guy, took care of the house, picked up dry cleaning, bought supplies, washed the dogs, handled maintenance and repairs, and 2 maids. These were full-time and several lived with us. We had a host of part-time staff as well. When I went to college, I was shocked by how everyone took care of themselves so well, when I barely knew how to tie my own shoes. 2. My private school had many Forbes 500 billionaire families, kids of world leaders, and general global establishment types. If we ever needed something anywhere, someone's parents or relatives or friend would have a connection. I just assumed that's how the world worked. 3. Money was always just an afterthought. Nobody ever asked anyone how much something cost. If you just liked something, you got it. Again, interacting with regular people in college was a huge eye-opener. 4. Respect. Everywhere I would go, either with my family or friends or their families, we were treated with what I understand now is a ridiculous amount of respect. It's hard to explain this one, but I think others in the same situation understand.
I feel like respect is a topic that we don't speak about enough nowadays, in that it isn't inherently given to you, but rather you are supposed to earn it. And I'm actually glad that this person, regardless of their social status or anything like that, is aware of this. And everyone should remember that. You don't owe anyone that you don't know personally respect. You only owe them an ounce of common human decency. Respect is earned through personal interaction. So, growing up, I knew my family and extended family was better off than others once high school came around, but it didn't really sink in until college. My parents immigrated from Iran to the US. I was a little kid and didn't have anything. My parents had engineering degrees, civil and computer, but my father wasn't allowed to work in our home country because he studied in the West. When we came here, they didn't speak English, so they couldn't work in their profession either. My mom stayed home, and my brother and me and my father worked several jobs. He saved up. along with a bit of money that was finally unfrozen, and started a small business. It grew very rapidly, but my parents didn't really change their own lifestyle. Since I was too young to really know what money is spent on when we were poor, it didn't really occur to me that we became rich. I just assumed this is what everyone in America did, the American dream, and that everyone else was like this, starts poor and then can afford all sorts of stuff. It didn't help that my middle school and high school were very split between rich and poor, so I figured the latter group was just in the process. I always heard college was expensive and some people could afford it, or that their parents had to save up or the kid had to get a job. I thought it was $1 million per year. I figured that seemed like something people couldn't afford. I based that on thinking that the lower class made $1 million a year, so spending a year's wage on 1 year of college would be unreasonable. Then I found out the average salary was less than my brother would spend partying in a weekend in college. Also, allowances growing up. I never had one and everyone else did, so I figured they were all rich. Then one day I found out this girl I was seeing at the end of high school had an allowance of $50 a month, and it blew my mind. To my parents' credit, we immigrated to the States with nothing, and they built a business that was successful. Also raised us very frugal. My dad still drives a 2006 Jeep Liberty and my mom a 2009 Ford Expedition. My brother and a few cousins love spending, though. Edit. Turns out the Liberty is a 2001 and the Expedition is 2003. They taught us to be very disciplined and financially savvy. I worked my ass off to go down the route of being a physician and on the side started a business. They made sure they didn't help me financially so I could learn how it was to grow a business. Fast forward several years and it became successful enough that I focus on the business instead of being in medicine. I'm not far wealthier than they are and plan on giving the same type of discipline to my children. One of my best friends whom I met in college is very similar. His parents own a multi-million-dollar company and throughout school he had to have a job and pay for everything himself. Did anyone else think I sounded really cool when I said the American dream?
I'm not from a wealthy family, but my step-grandparents are really quite well off, living up in their mansion in the hills. 2 of my stepbrothers were fostered to them by their mother, while the unlucky third lived in squalor with her. I didn't even realize the double standard that was out there until one Christmas when the 2 fostered brothers got an Xbox 360 and 10 games each. The console had only just been released, whilst the other brother got a single game for his PlayStation 2 and a $20 note, and I got given the same thing, despite not even being blood, and my father being hated by them. At some stage, my third stepbrother's existence reached critical mass and became an alcoholic. At age 8, a couple years ago, his mother and my father were outed as being addicts to certain illegal substances, which resulted in them having their children taken away by Child Protective Services at the behest of my grandparents, one of whom is very high up in child services. My 2 half-sisters were taken by my wonderful and somewhat well-off grandparents, one of whom works for child services and who are genuinely loving, intelligent people who gave a breath of fresh air and a better outlook on life to 2 girls who knew nothing of the sort, taking great care of them while my stepbrother got sent to live with his dad, the one who supplied him with his alcohol and an abuser of illegal substances himself. I have no idea where he is now, but I don't have high hopes for his future. Meanwhile, his brothers are at university making a future for themselves with everything all paid for them. Sorry for the rant which got sidetracked by the sad story of a very unlucky boy, but it is quite a good demonstration of the difference wealth can have on the outcome of your life, and how unlucky some people can be. Sure, the wealthy have their periods of bad luck, of course, but when you are already in a terrible situation, it tends to be compounded, and some people are too young to be able to deal with these kinds of things, or even have a semblance of influence on their own life, and it often leads them down dark roads that will likely perpetuate the cycle of poverty, or often simply just ending a promising young life. TLDR, have 3 stepbrothers. 2 were raised by wealthy grandparents and are well off and educated. 1 has lived a life of poverty and suffering, and as such, has a very bleak future in store, though he is only young.
That was honestly just kind of depressing, to be honest. My parents are filthy rich, but they try to keep us humble-ish, so our main house is actually our smallest. I thought it was small because every room feels essential. There's a kitchen, bedrooms, bathrooms, a casual dining room, a formal dining room, a family room, a lounge room, which is really just the formal family room, a study for each of my parents, a conservatory, 2 playrooms for the kids, again, one more formal than the other, a gym, a cellar, and an indoor pool. It was small in my head because I could name every room. Some of our other houses are big enough that they have a lot of random useless spaces that you don't know how to name. It has some couches in it. It's a sitting room. You get stuff like the lobby and the mezzanine. So I sort of thought that everything in our small house was essential. At age 10-ish, I was absolutely flummoxed to find that people put swimming pools outside. You may as well have told me that your bathroom was outside, like an old-style outhouse. Every one of our houses has a pool on the inside. I later found out that my parents did that on purpose because we're all pale as get out, and an outdoor pool would get us all very crispy and sunburned. Imagine my surprise when I found at about age 14 that some people didn't have pools at all. And then when I went to university that some people can't even swim. There was a lot of little stuff too. Everyone can eat with chopsticks, read music, know basic Latin, has a signet ring, or at least freaking know what one is, know which cutlery to use. I remember wondering if my friends were messing with me at a semi-formal university event in first year. It was a round table and no one knew which bread roll was theirs. Has an assortment of outfits of all possible dress codes ready to go at a moment's notice. Can I come to the gala tonight? Absolutely, no problem.
Suppose that you were sitting down at this table. The bread rolls are in front of you. Which bread roll would you take? The one on your left or the one on your right? Usually you would take the one on your left side. That is correct. But in a larger sense on society, that is wrong. Perhaps I could even substitute society with the universe. The correct answer is that it is determined by the one who takes his or her own bread roll first.
Just a little Steel Ball Run reference for my fellow JoJo fans. I was always amazed that people didn't have a closet full of clothes like me. I know that sounds stupid, but I wore Gap, Tommy Hilfiger, and all that other nonsense, and my mom made sure we all looked amazing. My best friend had like 2 pairs of shorts from Goodwill. I literally could not believe it. I got in trouble for trying to give her my play clothes, which were all still designer clothes, just ones I had had for a couple years. That and cars. I remember asking my friend's mom why she was upset waiting for her dad to get home from work so she could use the car. Can't you just use yours? The concept that some families could only afford one car blew my mind. Granted, I wasn't filthy rich at all, but when I switched to public school in 5th grade, my choice, very against what my parents wanted, my new friends all were in shock at my neighborhood and house. To me, it was just normal. All my private school friends had much bigger homes than me, some even with private planes. I am probably so wrong, but I always kind of think when someone has a private jet, that is like the 1%. I didn't necessarily grow up super rich, but my dad made between $500 and $750K a year while growing up. I think he makes closer to $750 to $1 mil now, and I had a few moments like this. My dad is usually a frugal person, but since he grew up poor, he afforded himself some luxuries. It wasn't until at least high school that I realized how out of the ordinary it was for both of my parents to have $30,000 watches. I think the biggest shock was college. It was totally paid for by my parents. They paid out of a 529 plan, but for my sister now and brother after they never set one up and are just paying right out of salary. I knew kids would have to take debt on, but I honestly thought until about a year ago, just graduated last May, that most kids would graduate with $10K debt max. It wasn't until just recently I learned some kids were taking on double that or more each year. It shocked me. And also made me thank my parents extensively for saving me from $100K or more debt by paying for college. I wouldn't say I was filthy rich, but I was definitely given a lot of advantages and head starts in life because of my dad's money. I can't imagine what growing up with an extremely rich parent gets you advantage-wise if my dad was able to give me everything he has. The only money I really think about regularly is my money, but it's kind of crazy to think about the different echelons of richness there are. Late to the party. Before my dad died, he was murdered when I was 7, we were super rich. He owned his own company and my mom owned her own business as well. I was telling my boyfriend the other day how she'd take us to the mall and just hand each of her 3 kids $500 and tell us to go wild for no reason. After he died, we fell into poverty and my mom went basically insane and lost the house, companies, and declared bankruptcy. Well, that was genuinely a terrible tragedy what happened to your father and mother, but that is a superhero origin story right there. That's all for now, but if you've got a recommendation for the kind of topics you'd like to see us talk about on this channel, then why don't you drop a comment below and tell us what you like. Also, if you've got a recommendation for me and what kind of voices you'd like to hear me do,
I could do a pretty good solid snake.
What was your high school's tragedy? We had this one teacher. She was the Quest teacher. It was a health class, basically. She talked about sexual education and the dangers of smoking, that sort of thing. We got to sit on couches in a big circle rather than desks in rows. She sadly contracted breast cancer, and it was pretty bad. She went bald from the chemo and had a port installed on her chest so they could just inject into that since they had already destroyed all the veins on her arms and whatnot. Despite all this hardship, she was one of the warmest, sweetest, most cheerful, and most loving people I have ever met. I'll always remember one particular thing that she said. She talked about going to a friend's funeral recently. The friend had died an agonizing and slow death from cancer. My teacher wore a brightly colored floral pattern dress while everyone else was wearing black. She did this because she was not mourning. She was celebrating the end of her friend's suffering. She had accepted death and made peace with it, and knew that it was just the natural course of life. She died a year later and the whole school was devastated, and I made sure to wear bright colors. I think that was actually rather beautiful. It's a natural thing as people to either deal with the death of those we love or our own expiration, but the fact of the matter is death is a natural part of life that we simply have to accept at some time or another. A girl named Joy, who was insanely happy and nice and popular, had an aneurysm and died. She was uncharacteristically mean that day and told everyone she had a headache. It happened in the hallway, and she just kinda slumped against the lockers. We found her when classes let out. One kid said, "Joy's here in the hall." A huge jock dude picked her up and took her to the nurse, and someone called 911. She had been dead for some time by then. Saddest thing I ever saw. She was the sweetest person. Ate lunch with the special kids a few times a month. She was a sophomore and insanely popular. She was really tiny, and at one time, at a dance, a weird rap mosh pit formed. Joy got to crowd surf. She really resembled a tiny, fairy-like girl. Our whole school mourned her for months. It's always a tragedy when a kind young person has their life inexplicably and suddenly taken away. I hope you rest in peace, Joy. I was only in 9th grade at the time. I think he was in 10th or 11th. But the dude was a stellar wrestler and all-around very nice guy. He would help the newer kids, like myself, in practice and give us tips on how to get better. Good-looking, friendly. You know, the typical star athlete that everyone loved. One night, he was at Harris Teeter, getting some groceries and was carjacked with his friends. They drove them both in their car about 5 counties away, told them to get out, put their shirts on their heads, and told them to run into the woods. As they did, they were shot. The friend managed to get away. I think he was wounded, but Louis was shot in the head. God, it's been years. This happened in the late 90s, but I can remember the dude like it was yesterday. It was a very sad time for our school. Here's a little story about how I met Louis and ended up on the wrestling team. I actually got caught skipping school by Coach Perry, wrestling and gym coach, in the 9th grade. I was very small, maybe 5'5", and like 105 pounds. I was playing Pokemon Red and Blue with a friend in the stairs that no one used that led up to the weight room. Coach Perry came in looking for some equipment. They used this stairwell as a storage closet. You really couldn't even go upstairs all the way because of everything blocking it. Nava was with him, helping him drag out mats for wrestling practice. My friend was immediately excused and sent back to class. I was told to help them get the mats out, which I did. I was afraid I was going to be suspended or that he was going to call my parents. I remember Louis patting me on the back and telling me everything was cool and that Coach Perry was going to make me an offer. After the mats were set up, Coach Perry and Nava talked for a moment, then called me over to a scale. I was told to get on. I weighed in at 104 or something like that, and Coach Perry and Louis just smiled. I was then told I had 2 choices: join the wrestling team or be taken to the offices to get rode up. Naturally, I chose wrestling and was running around the gym in a trash bag that evening. I literally knew nothing about wrestling. The stances, points, and everything else were unknown to me. After practice, we had scrims and I had to go against the 110 guys. I remember Louis taking me aside and showing me this killer leg swoop and grab. He let me practice it on him a few times, then I did it for real in the scrim. I remember it went perfect.
Kid never knew what hit him, and I put him on his back. Louis came over, gave me a high five and a big slap on the back, walked over to the coach and said, "Looks like we found our new 105 guy." 2 weeks or so later, he was dead. To this day, I still don't think I thanked him enough for being so cool to a freshman like that. He made sure I felt like I belonged on the team and wasn't just there to get out of trouble. Just a small story to show you the kind of dude Louis was. Always willing to help and a class act. Just a good all-round dude. I had planned on quitting after a few practices, but after his death, I stayed on the team for the full season. Just didn't seem right, because Louis would never have quit. This was both tragic and beautiful. Louis Navi, you sound like an absolute angel. I hope you rest in peace while your killers suck eggplants in hell. You know what I mean by that. Coach Perry, it sounds like an authority figure that you need at a school. Someone who is not only willing to dole out punishment where necessary, but also offer opportunity to someone who then went on to do a full season of wrestling, which they wouldn't have done otherwise. It's beautiful how these people helped inspire you, but also unbelievably tragic, which is why I say, people, you should cherish everyone that you meet and know, because anything can happen in this crazy world. Shying away from a death post, Catholic high school. Two of our favorite teachers who had actually made their classes engaging and opened up their classroom to anybody needing a hand in school and in life had both divorced before they had started teaching there. They decided to move in together after dating for 2 years and were planning on getting married the next year. They kept it all quiet out of pure professionalism, and somehow administration found out and fired both of them. I believe for breaking the school's code of conduct for teachers by cohabiting before marriage. We lost two of the best teachers in our school that helped out and inspired their students in every way they could try to. This one actually makes me sad because a good teacher is really hard to find. When I was a kid, I did not appreciate my opportunity in education very often. I would be disrupting. If I was in a bad mood, I would have standoffs with teachers, and I just didn't really care. But now as an adult with that past, I greatly appreciate education, and I think everyone should. Teachers already have a hard time dealing with kids that disrespect them, but also when it's like administrative rules like that, the only thing I can really say is hopefully that didn't stop their plans of getting married, and I hope they still have each other. But at the end of the day, it still really sucks because now this school has been deprived of two people that seemingly really cared about education. In my final year of high school, there was an absolute poo storm regarding personal information that was accessed by half the grade using a teacher's login details. We had the password for years and used it to check marks and ranks of schoolwork, and all was good. In the final weeks of high school, some idiot decides to change his English mark, moving himself from 33rd to 3rd. The school obviously finds out, and everyone who is involved gets in trouble. The kid that changed his marks obviously got expelled, while the other half of the grade all got punished by not being permitted to attend the school formal and graduation. Next thing I know, everyone's starting a huge protest and some CEO or something gets involved and revoked the punishment because parents were threatening to get lawyers or something. Considering the teachers gave out the password willingly to another student and the school refused to admit the teacher's mistake, aggressively trying to blame the students for hacking when that simply wasn't the case. That one was honestly refreshing compared to everything else that we've been reading through, but don't get your hopes up, it is not about to get much happier. We had a teacher that for some reason everyone took a dislike to. He wasn't that bad or strict, but for some reason everyone hated him. I was in class once and we locked him in his equipment cupboard. Stuff like that regularly happened to him. He never really used to say anything, just kinda got on with it. Eventually, he split from his wife and lost his driving license for drink driving. He ended up having to get the bus in the morning with everyone traveling to school. As always, everyone was really cruel to him. Halfway through year 9, he decided to commit self-deletion. The worst thing about that was that everyone found it really funny. Adult me is feeling very ashamed of teenage me right now. Edit. Yes, I'm aware of how awful this story is. The man was clearly battling some severe depression at the time. This was roughly 18 years ago in the Midlands, UK. He taught woodwork. No, he wasn't physically pushed into his equipment cupboard. He used to go in there to get equipment and drink alcohol. One day when he was in there for a long period, someone just locked the door. I can't remember how long for, but it was during a 2-hour session and he was outside for most of it. I'm hoping that it was just a couple of minutes, but it could have been longer. I didn't get the school bus and only had his class for one term. This was a problem the whole school were involved in. There were roughly 1,250 students in the school. Everyone in the school had this same outlook towards him. He had previously gotten into arguments with parents, although I don't know the reason for this. The teachers knew about it, but I think with his drinking issues, they weren't sure how to handle it. They were very slow in telling us that he had died, and by the time they figured out how to address the issue, everyone knew. So I think no one knew how to handle the situation. No one reveled in his death, no one knew what to do, and I think the jokes may have been people's attempt at handling the situation. So for one thing, I'm glad that this person feels bad about the way that this individual was treated. You shouldn't feel bad about it all your life because you probably didn't have like a direct hand in it by any means, but I'm glad you feel bad. So I picked this story out specifically because I come from the Midlands of the UK, specifically the West Midlands, based on the calculations of when it was posted and the 18 years. I was not in high school at this point, it seems. But seriously, if you find someone who's being treated like utter crap for seemingly no reason whatsoever, just check on them, please. Like, a bit of kindness goes a real long way, and it can even maybe prevent someone from making a stupid decision. This was just really sad. We had 3 heart-wrenching, oddly connected tragedies in 1 year. When I was a junior, a girl lost control of her car and crashed. The impact ended her life, but her 2 passengers were okay. She was a wonderfully nice girl, always smiling, participating in an ROTC drill team. The school was shaken by her sudden passing. I attended her funeral and cried my eyes out, wondering how her family managed to not cry 24/7. My brother was a pallbearer. A month later, a senior boy crashed into another vehicle while on his way to an ROTC drill team practice early in the morning, way before school started. He was the captain of the team, a quiet leader, gifted, known for solving Rubik's Cubes in class. My brother. He was comatose. The pallbearer's carnation from the girl's funeral was still on his desk. Its water had been poured out, and the white flower was dying slowly. As if that wasn't enough, a sophomore boy was involved in a collision just a few days later when he was leaving the school. He died instantly. Oddly enough, he was involved in ROTC extracurriculars too. The news hit me like a ton of bricks as I sat in the hospital's waiting room. My brother died in the hospital about a week later. I was allowed to stay home for the rest of the school year. At his funeral, I understood why the family of the deceased doesn't sob their way through the service. We had moved to a place beyond tears. We finally took his old furniture out of his room today. I cried thinking about the pallbearer's carnation sitting on his desk. My high school's tragedy will follow me for the rest of my life. I totally get that part about the being beyond tears bit when you're at a funeral. I have not had that many losses in my family until about 3 years ago with my grandmother, and it was heartbreaking. I won't go into details, but I completely understand. Rest in peace to all of those people. Countless. One student was run over by an 18-wheeler in front of his family. One very popular teacher went home one day feeling ill and passed away 2 days later from cancer he didn't know he had. 2 different teachers committed self-deletion, multiple drunk driving deaths, a drug-related multiple murder, another drug-related murder, a CP case, a teacher who molested several students, and one student allegedly killed by the Boston bomber years before the bombing. I think that just sounds like a cursed school. I'm so sorry to the victims of those occurrences that didn't die, and rest in peace to those that did. I gotta say, I have picked some really depressing topics to talk about on this channel, like, goddamn, strap in, people. An English/drama teacher got a role on a late-night TV show. Got the twins out on TV and had to quit teaching. Was a tragedy for us that she left. She was a hot younger teacher, and suddenly drama class had a lot less male students. I do hope you enjoyed that slightly funny one while you can, because it's about to get a little depressing again. We had a security guard named Creighton. He was the most kind-hearted man you will have ever met. He smiled at everyone and was open to talking to you no matter who you were. I remember him overseeing detention, and it was my first time during my freshman year. He walked up to me, and I was scared to bits, and he told me, "You see this room? Don't ever come back here. You're better than it. Don't let me down." I never got in trouble again because of him. Senior year, he was diagnosed with cancer, and it was already too late. He became this skinny ghost of what he used to be, but he continued to smile and cheer up everyone's lives until his last day alive. The day he passed, I think the entire school cried. I credit him for making me who I am today, because of how supportive he was. Like I said, man, you just gotta check on people, show them some support, give them some motivating words or something, It doesn't work for everyone, I'm not gonna lie to you, but goddamn. Rest in peace, Creighton. I have 2 stories to tell. One is the story that affected me the most personally, and the other is a story that shows the true courage and strength of a guy I did not personally know. The first 2 stories begins with a German kid, me, who moved to the States and started going to American school. Once I was in middle school, a boy named Blake approached me and started asking me to translate this long list of words he had made to German, asking me to sound them out for him so that he could learn. He was obsessed with World War II and the Germans, so he began to befriend me. I personally thought he was incredibly annoying. One day, he invited me over and I decided why not and went to his home. Ever since, we became best friends. Once high school rolled around, I was more focused on school and he began hanging out with the wrong crowd. We both had carpentry classes and shared this big senior locker to keep our tools in. I was working for a friend's dad when I got a call that he had gone out drinking and got into a fatal car accident. His car hit a semi-truck. He got knocked unconscious and his car was on fire. My middle school best friend burned to death and all they could find were his teeth. I still tear up thinking about it. The worst part is all of a sudden everyone that barely knew him is acting like they were his best pals and some girl that he dated for 3 months got to speak at his funeral. Yet I didn't even get to sit up front because all 150 people that knew him seemed to show up because it was the popular thing to do. I can't be too bitter though because I'm glad that many people showed up for him. The worst part was cleaning out his side of the locker. That honestly still haunts me today. Rest in peace, Blake. The second story I'm not too familiar with, only that 3 friends were driving back from somewhere on the highway in a 2-seater coupe. The friend in the middle wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and they got into an accident. However, the guy in the passenger seat moved over to grab the guy sitting in the middle, which saved his life. But he himself was thrown through the glass window several yards and was fatally wounded. His last words were, "I'm sorry," and he died there on the concrete outside of his friend's car. I'm not religious, but for Blake's sake, I hope there is a God, and that one day I'll see him again. But not the Blake I knew in high school. I want to see the Blake I knew in middle school. This one was sort of interesting because a similar thing actually happened in my high school where someone I did personally know died. I wasn't amazing friends with them or anything, but I chose to silently mourn them and stay at school the day while a lot of people across the year group went to attend the funeral because they wanted an early day off school, even though a lot of them didn't actually know him. This will probably get buried, but I have to participate in this. My high school was known in the area for having a sophomore curse, where something awful happened to a sophomore every year. Obviously, that's silly, but it just always ended up being true. The year I was a sophomore, a girl I'd been in school with my entire life, but wasn't close friends with, died of rabies. I heard that she had been bitten by a raccoon while taking out garbage. Also heard that she was uncharacteristically mean and angry a few days before her death. I had always known her to be exceptionally shy and quiet, probably sweet, but I can't say I really knew that. It happened very suddenly. She was out of school for what I heard was the flu, and then maybe a day and a half later, she died. Her parents still release butterflies in our town every year on the anniversary. She was an only child. I wish I had sent them a card or something. The tragedy that was more personal to me, though, was a guy who had died in a car accident. He was driving in the rain and his car flipped over into a creek and he drowned. We were really close. He was 1 year older than me, but we'd been in a program that mixed 2 grades together since first grade. He'd been one of my first boyfriends when that meant making out on marching band trips. And we'd been on school trips to big cities together. The night the accident happened, I had been chatting with him on AOL Instant Messenger when he said he had to go meet our other friends to go see Star Wars. A few hours later, that friend called me asking if I had spoken to him because he'd never shown up. Crazy thing is, I thought absolutely nothing about it at the time. I just figured he got distracted or his mom had decided not to let him go. He was also a very treasured only child, just like the girl from my grade. The next morning, I got to school, and everything was completely quiet. It was so eerie to see no one saying anything, everyone just staring and crying. I walked up to the door of my homeroom already sure that something horrible had happened, but I hadn't made the connection. Another close friend was standing outside the door staring off into space. I asked him what was going on with everyone, and he just said his name died last night, in this chilling monotone. Before I could even form a thought, my mouth was filled with vomit. Not sure why my body reacted that way,
But I spent an hour on the bathroom floor sobbing and puking until my mom came to get me. I still can't even write about it without tearing up. Rest in peace to both of those people, but this has just made me think about how lucky I am that I did not have a very close, personal, or important friend, ripped from me at a young age or anything like that. My God. So in my state flowers are illegal to pull out of the ground, but not illegal to buy and plant. Even on private property, you can be fined huge amounts of money per flower removed. Some seniors wanted to pull a prank by planting state flowers on the brand new football stadium field in the shape of 2008. And on top of 2008, they decided to also plant flowers in the shape of a phallic symbol, roughly 35 yards in length. None of them thought to check to see how much each flower would cost to remove. $5,000. The school, which was privately owned, couldn't possibly pay to remove the over 200 flowers the seniors planted, so every football game that season was played on top of a phallic symbol made of flowers. Eventually, someone was willing to break the law in order to remove them, and when we came in on a Monday, they were gone. They even filled the gaps with sod. Also, since then, the law has changed so that all you have to do to remove them is have a state representative present during the process, and you must replant them. So maybe some good came out of it. Also, the seniors were never caught or never announced publicly. That is honestly pretty funny, and I am so glad that I could end this on a slightly more upbeat note. This was kind of hard to read through to some degree, but all the stories were very interesting and really made me think about stuff.
What is your bullet frickin' dodge story?
I had trouble breathing and had been wheezing for a few months. Figured it was just bronchitis that I get all the time, and got some antibiotics. Figured what the hell, I guess I should ask a doctor. You know, the people trained in figuring this stuff out. Found a tumor the size of a pineapple wrapped around my heart and lungs. Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Definitely should have gone earlier, but so glad I actually decided to go. Edit. I'm alive, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Haha. For those commenting about the size of the tumor, it was a little over 5 by 3 inches and went from my trachea to my diaphragm. Double edit. 2.5 years cancer-free. Actually, as of yesterday. Didn't realize until today. Haha. Weird coincidence. At the time, it was not very good. I got to watch my pericardial drain surgery that night because they were afraid the anesthesia would make my trachea collapse. So I got to watch a surgery on myself, awake. Had to be at a 45-degree angle or the weight of the tumor pressed on my lungs, and under nothing except local anest for the catheter site. I like to think it's something not many people can say they've done. Advancing the catheter felt like slowly having the wind knocked out of you, but without the impact. I could actually feel almost exactly where it was as it went. Probably one of the most unique feelings I've ever felt. I could also feel the pop when they pierced my pericardium, and I could feel a very slight pressure relief as they drained the fluid initially. First of all, I could not imagine being awake for my own surgery, but I guess a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. And second, I don't know either, but where it's like, pop, I always just think about the bit from Superman vs. the Elite. You can almost hear the pop. Lived outside St. Louis in my early childhood, woke up screaming in the worst pain of my life, and then I felt my face get sprinkled with something. I actually got shot in the hip, and when I sat up, a bullet went through my window right where my head was just at, and what sprinkled me in the face was tiny pieces of glass. So I dodged a literal bullet by taking a bullet. Edit. Really expected this to get lost in the sauce, but here are some details someone else asked about. So my bed was right next to my bedroom window, parallel to the wall. The end of the bed where my head was at was right next to the window. The bullet entered the wall and struck me in my left hip, so I guess I was sleeping on my stomach. The windows were real weird now that I think about it. It was actually 2 single-pane pieces of glass separated by 6 inches, and since both of them had a hole in them, you could stick a rod in and see that the bullet traveled right where my head had just been on my pillow. Edit. Another side story connected to this now that I think about those windows. One time I came home from school, I noticed the inner window shattered and there was blood all over the place. Turned out it was my dog that tried to launch herself through the window. We were pretty certain that someone was at my window scoping it out. She was super defensive of all of us. I'm pretty sure this actually occurred after the shooting. Yeah, I'll admit, living in England my whole life, I don't think I could ever feel really, truly comfortable unless I am within a brick house.
Not me, but I had a hand in it. Knew this guy in high school peripherally. He was in the cool crowd of rocker-type guys, and I was a nerd. New girl arrived at our school from another town. She and I became friends, and a few months later, she started dating him. At first, she seemed cool, and we would talk about everything. At one point, however, she started talking about how she's been hooking up with her ex-boyfriend behind cool guy's back. Just before the end of the school year, she tells me she's pregnant and that she knows it belongs to her ex-boyfriend. She's laughing and really proud of herself because cool guy is going to do the right thing. Withdraw his college application, go work at the local gas station to support her and the baby. Her ex, the father of the baby, is kind of a loser, so she thinks it's the best thing even that she can screw him while making cool guy support her. I didn't really know this guy that well, but I got his phone number from an acquaintance of mine who knew it. Cool guy knew I was friends with this girl, but was still pretty surprised to hear from me. I told him all about her ploy and said, "Get a paternity test. It isn't yours." This guy was incredibly stoic, but after a sizable pause, he just broke down crying for a few minutes. He then thanked me, they broke up, and cool guy went to college and made something of himself. Just a good old story about bros looking out for bros. Damn girl, how could you even try and do that to cool guy? He's cool guy.
When I was 7, I got lost in Spain without my family. I had been lost for about 5 hours, really late at night, and had been going down some dark alleyways and car parks. I started asking random strangers if they spoke English, but they were only middle-aged men walking around alone. One guy didn't speak English, but he gave me a cuddle and took me back to his house around the corner. At this point, I'm crying my eyes out and just appreciated the help and kindness. When I got to his house, it turned out that he had a family, and the son was learning English in school. He got out his school workbook and asked me my name, and then they took me to the police station. My parents picked me up about 10 minutes later as they were driving around in a police car. That man could have been anyone, and I could have been kidnapped and never seen again. Not your ordinary bullet dodge.
Honestly, that is such a tough call. You're 7 years old in a foreign country and you are dead lost. Oh, God. I mean, I guess, yeah, eventually you'd have to just go, sod it, I'm going to rely on the kindness of strangers, but straight up, I thought that story was going to get a lot worse before it got better.
I had my police car pulled over off the side of this rural road with the emergency lights on. I had stopped because there was a man splayed out in the middle of the asphalt. Turns out he was super drunk and decided to take a nap during his walk home. I had just helped him to his feet and placed him in the back of the car to drive him home when I hear an engine revving hard. I closed the car door and straightened up, just in time to have my car smashed out from in front of me by a pickup truck. I felt the truck's side mirror clip my body armor. The driver was drunk and had decided to go looking for his drunk friend. That friend was the guy I just picked up. The guy in the back seat survived the impact because those old Crown Victorias had massive trunks. The driver went to the hospital, and in the coming months he pled guilty for impaired driving. I remember the collision analysis showed the guy hit my car at 145 kilometers an hour. It was a wild night, and I still have major hang-ups when I have to stop my police car on roadways.
I have a good amount of respect for police. I don't think every cop is on the up and up, but if you've ever seen any of those like body cam footage things where stuff just hits the fan, my God, police, especially police in America, go through some wild stuff.
New teacher started at my high school at the start of the year, integrated fine. Students were assigned a pair of teachers to pay special attention to their academic needs. He was one of mine. Because of this, he knew I had a tense relationship with my parents. Because of the occasional sensitive material we covered in his English class, which I also took, he knew I had a telling sensitivity to sexual violence. As a teacher, he knew I was a troubled kid with a shaky support network. He gave me off-base but evidently well-intentioned advice about managing my controlling parents, worked with me and my other overseeing teacher to try and make school less nightmarish for me, and overall seemed like a warm, engaging guy. He gave some people the willies, but I felt fine around him. Then, middle of the week, a few months into the year, he doesn't show up. We're told he's not employed here anymore. No official details. As you maybe guessed, turned out he had an alleged history of sexually abusing students at past jobs. I don't know how it had been handled that they were able to find this out without him having tripped any of the flags I assume exist in the screening for potential teachers, but I guess better late than never. I don't think the school ever got, prosecuted for screwing up or whatever, so I guess it was an understandable miss. But yeah, that would have been pretty freaking awful. I got lucky. Me and any other kids, he might have been charming. For the sake of keeping it fresh on the
first take, I was going in with like a wizard voice, and then I kind of went, no, I don't think I want to use the wizard voice on this anymore. It got a little dark.
Dated this guy briefly in college. He got into a horse riding accident early on in the relationship. Horse fell on him, broke his ankle, pelvis, and hip. Apparently had a prior addiction to pain pills I was completely oblivious to. He quickly relapsed and turned into a crazy pill-popping psycho. Tried sticking out and helping him. I did my best and I couldn't handle it. When I told him I was done with the relationship, he proceeded to call me the worst names in the world, begged me to forgive him, and then tried asking me to come hang out after he had called me the biggest harlot in town. WTF. He then started doing harder stuff and has been involved in a hit-and-run accident. The guy he hit died, X moved the body, fled the scene, dumped his truck in a car park that had surveillance cameras in it. He did get caught for it. Talk about a bullet dodged. I've had some pretty crappy relationships, apparently.
I think this is quite exemplary of the downward spiral that drugs can take you in. I mean, this dude was apparently riding horses one day, and then he's doing like hit and runs and dumping bodies and stuff. Seriously, kids, stay away from hardcore drugs. God. I met him on one of those sites that isn't just a dating site, but is a dating site to find someone who shares your particular interests, and we seemed compatible enough to meet. I much prefer talking face-to-face, so once I see someone might be interesting, I generally set up a face-to-face date right away. We decided to meet halfway and we'd figure out where to eat once we were there. So we met in the parking lot and I got in his car and he drove us around until we found a restaurant we both liked. We sat down and immediately he started chatting. He was fairly charming about it, but it got really creepy really quick because he seemed to move the conversation onto every person I interacted with. And once he established how close I was to them, how often I saw them, texted them, talked to them, it's like he would look satisfied for a moment and then move on to the next. It's hard to really explain, but I would tell a story about me and a friend and he would ignore every part of the story and just go straight to questioning me about my friend. The only thing he seemed interested about them was how often I interacted with them. Like, for example, stuff like this. Him. Are you guys close? Me. Fairly. Him. How often do you hang out? Me. A few times a week. He nods and brings the conversation to coworkers, asking me what my boss was like. Was I always on time? And he just did that over and over. I mentioned my parents and he wants to know if I'm a good girl who goes to see them every weekend, if I talk to my mom or dad on the phone every night. I mean, he would bring it in with stories and from a teasing tone, but he did it over and over with every person I mentioned interacting with. It got creepy and I was freaking out in the back of my head and it was getting really hard not to get up and just leave. Awkwardness scares me more than getting kidnapped though, and having to call someone to give me a ride because I thought the guy was interviewing me to be his next victim just sounded nuts in an already intense situation for me. I just started lying my butt off, so I mentioned brothers. He of course asked how many. I said 5 and started going into vivid detail about how overprotective they are, how they check in on me constantly, how one is a cop, the other is a private investigator, etc. I also mentioned how my friends make me do a safety call. Either I was paranoid or it worked because he did take me back to my car and I got to drive away and never contact that guy again. I figure if the guy was casing my life out, those would be red flags for him. I'm not gonna lie, I would probably have the exact same thought process as this person. It takes even less than that for me to stop and consider whether or not my date or someone in my general vicinity is plotting my downfall at any time.
Back in my raving days in the early 2000s, before it got trendy, I got deep into e-use and subsequently became a small-time dealer. Small time over the course of a few months rapidly became pretty big. One night after re-upping, buying more Scooby snacks to sell, I went over to my buddy's house to play Counter-Strike until the early hours of the morning. On my way home, I got pulled over. I had 2,500 green triangle Scooby snacks in my trunk. I pulled out my license and registration, laid it out on my lap before the cop came to my window and proceeded to be as polite as possible. The cop asked me why my eyes were red and asked if I smoked the ganja. I said absolutely not. I never liked the ganja. Weird, I know. And I told him we were playing Counter-Strike for an 8-hour-plus session, and that's probably why. He ran my license, which was clean, came back to my car and said, "Okay, drive safely and let me go." I left that scene bricking it. Had he looked in my trunk, I would have been arrested and looking at a distribution felony and at least 12 to 25 years. Not to mention, it would have destroyed my life. I stopped dealing and raving after that. Today, I have a lovely wife, my own home, good health, thriving business, healthy toddler, and another one on the way. Talk about bullet dodged. My life and the life of those I love would have been drastically different if it played out the other way. It should have. I am the lucky one. I lose sleep often thinking about that. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the encouraging words and upvotes. For those of you who are critical of my choice to slang E, you need to realize that my customers were all adults with free will. Some prominent doctors, lawyers, teachers, etc. The choices we all make in life, and the consequences of those choices fall on us, period. I didn't make the drugs or import them. I didn't force anyone. I've actually cut people off many times. And today's society is frankly too quick to blame everyone else but the person, ourselves. Stop that. For those saying I got a lucky pass and need to pay it forward, I totally agree. My life changed from that day on. Now, I don't have that much respect for drug dealers by any means, but I am happy that this person is keeping their nose clean now and living a decent life. I really agree with the sentiment about personal responsibility. That is an issue that I think a lot of people really don't understand anymore. You just gotta think about your actions, how it will impact you, how it might follow you in the future before you do something. Go watch the Back to the Future trilogy. That's basically the core of that entire thing. How your actions, how your decisions can have a terrible outcome in the future. Well, just recently I had a job offer, which never felt right in my gut. After the initial excitement of actually getting an offer wore off, I was feeling kind of meh towards the position, but figured I could do it for a year or two since it would potentially allow for a better quality of life. However, when reading the contract, so many warning bells went off in my head. My husband works in employment and labor law, so I had him review the contract. The first words out of his mouth last night were, "Don't sign that contract as it is." Some highlights include, keep in mind I work in K-12 education, not some extremely secretive cutthroat industry, a 1-year no-compete clause for any tangentially related position in the entire county, which, keep in mind, has the largest school district. 60 days written notice if I were to leave, not crazy at first, but good luck getting a new job over the summer, which is when most schools post positions. If I decided not to return after signing a contract, I'd have to reimburse all insurance benefits starting from July 1st, 2017. Not sure if these are standard in other industries, but I've never seen anything like this as a teacher. Basically, it would make it close to impossible to leave the job, and I could potentially be screwed so many ways if I did. If this was what was in the contract, what could the work environment be like? Just sent off my thanks but no thanks email to the director with the school year quickly approaching. Looks like I'll be back at my current employer.
Read your contracts, kids. I know I don't. No, I pay other people to read them for me. The city was doing road construction in front of our place about 3 years ago. It was annoying, noisy, and covered everything with fine dust. During this time frame, my son ended up catching some sort of bug, or so we thought, that seemed a lot worse at night. 3 nights in a row, he ended up jumping out of bed after throwing up all over the place and having diarrhea. It was awful. We would spend hours just rubbing his back and cleaning him up. I would then put him to bed in the spare bedroom and he would pass out completely exhausted. After the 3rd night, I went on a cleaning spree and was basically scouring the hell out of everything to get the sick air out of the house, when I discovered that damn dust from the road construction was coating everything with this grimy blackish residue that was incredibly hard to remove, or what I thought was road dust. I was irate enough that I took a pic and posted it on Facebook and was whinging about the construction and asking if anyone else was having the same issue. A couple hours later, I get a message from a friend that asked if we had an oil furnace. I thought it was odd, but just said that, yes, we do, and asked why she asked. She then proceeded to tell me that all her ceiling fans and vents, etc. looked exactly like my pic did when her furnace filter got clogged and wasn't burning off the oil properly, which in turn filled her house with carbon monoxide. I totally went into preservation mode and packed everyone into the truck truck and drove around the corner to the fire station. Firemen came in their trucks with their carbon monoxide detectors, and sure as hell the basement was highly toxic and was filling the house. My son's room is directly above the furnace room, and when the heat was kicking in at night, he was getting poisoned. We are all lucky to be alive, especially my boy. Our landlord installed carbon monoxide detectors 2 days later after the house aired out and the furnace guy did his repairs. Scary stuff, kids. So I actually do laboring. I've never done road work before, but God, I can only imagine how bad the road dust is for you. But I did a lot of soft strip demolition work, really. And when I was working like 10-hour shifts a day, I would do like 50-hour weeks or something like that, just moving stuff around for these guys. Loads of people would not wear their mask when it's like we've just been breaking down walls and there's loads of construction dust everywhere. And obviously as a voice actor, I want to protect my voice and everything. But I would just know all these guys that would take like, I don't know, 12 smoke breaks a day or something, probably more, and still just be breathing in this dust because they didn't want to wear a mask. And I'm like, dude, you are ridiculous. Your lungs are going to be messed up in the future. Whew, I'm so glad that the story didn't end in tragedy, but that's why it's a bullet dodge story. I told this to my dental hygienist recently and she thought it was funny, so here you go. My friend owned this camp in the mountains. When it wasn't in season, he brought a bunch of friends up to hang out. So it's very late at night and he goes to get some people at the front entrance and leaves me and another friend alone. We decide to do the zip line over this pond. As my friend is explaining to me, you're going to feel a yank after you jump off. I just tell him, go and I'll see what you're talking about. He goes and looks awesome. Now keep in mind, it's pitch black outside, so I ready myself and jump. I feel the little hitch he was talking about, but something isn't right. As I conclude that something indeed isn't right, it feels like I get hit with a pickup truck in the back. I was falling about 25 feet without even knowing and landed perfectly on my back in about 1.5 feet of water. The rope snapped. Any other rotation would have left me severely injured or dead. My friend thought I died, but I got up and met him around the corner. My back looked like I had been shot point blank with about 50 paintballs. Other than that, I was fine. Well, that is some divine luck. Like, they didn't even realize they were falling. It was that dark. God damn, they are one lucky SOB. I was in Windhoek, Namibia doing the post-college wanderer thing. I was hitting the bars when I randomly bumped into an Australian guy I'd met a few weeks earlier in Harare, Zimbabwe. Harare is an epic crapberg, so there's nothing to do but get drunk and wait for your flight/bus out while you regret your decision to visit Harare. This Australian dude was my companion on the drinking, waiting, and regretting part, but we were going to different cities and parted ways when we left. So we randomly meet again in Windhoek and quickly decide that we need to get smashing drunk, just like 3-week-old times. Namibia is a great place to get drunk in mostly safe streets, the animus and energy of African nightlife, and relic German colonial predilection for extraordinary beer. As we're at the bar getting blasted out of our minds on 35 varieties of Namibian lagers, this gal comes up and starts flirting with me. She's smoking hot, great conversation for a couple hours, and she ends up asking if I want to come back to her place. I hadn't gotten laid in months and was 22 years old, feeling frisky as hell, but I said no. Something just didn't seem right. I tell my buddy that I'm going to call it a night and go back to my hostel. He asks if I minded if he made a go at the girl. I tell him sure, but something seems weird about her. I go back and pass out. I woke up with a screaming hangover the next day and spent the entire day in bed. I spent a couple more days in Windhoek, 10 out of 10 town by the way, highly recommend, but don't come across him again. I didn't expect to, so no big deal. I buy a ride west across the desert to Swakopmund and spend a few days hanging out there, and I run into my friend looking like a wreck. Turns out the chick took him back to her place, got him blackout drunk, took literally everything he owned except for the clothes he was wearing, and ditched him 3 miles outside the city in the desert. He tried to hitchhike his way back to the hostel but didn't know where he was and ended up on the back of a pickup truck going the wrong direction, depositing him in Swakopmund. Really glad I let my brain overrule my one-eyed monster in that situation. It doesn't happen often, but I'm glad when it does. Dodged a bullet. Now, I won't go into detail, but as a gentleman who has taken some pretty big risks in some cases, this Australian dude is just on another level. He's either more daring or more naive than I am, because I would never go with someone that I didn't really trust in a foreign country that I didn't speak the language in, to a location that I'm unaware of or anything like that. Hell, I'm surprised that they would just go wandering like that and then just get absolutely trashed, because, man, anyone could take advantage of you, really.
People, what is your craziest, most interesting, I need a favor, no questions asked story? Can I stand here and speak to you like we know each other? A girl was leaving a wedding reception alone from a cruise boat I worked on. I was on shore as passengers were leaving, and she came up and asked me this. I told her absolutely and jumped right into the role. She gave me a big hug and said how good it was to see me. Around then, I kept a smile on my face, but asked if something was wrong. As it turned out, there was another guest at the reception making her uncomfortable. She said he hadn't done anything specific, it was just a bad feeling. But she didn't want to go pointing him out or accusing him of anything. She just wanted to see him go to his car and leave before she went out to the lot. Once that happened, we chatted another few minutes before she was on her way. I cannot deny that it is good to go with your gut feeling in situations like this. If you've watched Patch Adams, you know. Like this person said, they didn't accuse this person of anything directly or even feel like they did anything specific, but, your life is in your hands at the end of the day based on the decisions that you make. If you wanted to go about it that way, go ahead. Not me, but a family member. He was USAF with a number of people under his command and stationed in Nevada IIRC. In the middle of the night, one of his guys shows up on his porch, banging on his door as if his life depended on it. "Sir, I done messed up. I need your help to fix it. Can you come with me?" With nothing more than saying, "Son, whatever it is you need, we'll get you through it." He dons his dungarees and gets in the guy's car, and they drive off into the dead of the night. He notices they are headed out of town into the desert in the pitch black of night. He tries to get the driver to talk, and the guy just sort of breaks down. "I had an argument with my woman, so I drove her out into the desert and left her there. I done messed up. They'll boot me out for sure after this." The boss is doing his best to keep the guy calm, reassuring him he's going to come out of this okay. Outwardly, he's serene, but he's getting more and more anxious by the minute. They drove further and further into the desert, finally pulling off-road. They get out and the guy goes into his trunk, hands over a flashlight and points his boss towards where he left the girl. Boss starts calling out, hoping the girl was nearby, and turns to ask the airman for his girl's name. While turning, the beam of his flashlight hits the guy, and all the tumblers scarily clicked into place. The airman was carrying a shovel. In the heat of an argument, the airman strangled his gal to death and drove her out into the desert in a state of panic over what he'd done. So he went to the one guy he knew could help him set things to right, his boss. His boss that somehow now found himself helping to dig a shallow grave and trying to seem supportive. After all, here he was in the desert with a killer. Nobody knew where he was, and certain death awaited at the hands of this guy or those of Mother Nature if he couldn't keep a cool head. The officer was smart about it. He convinced the airman to bury her shallow so the scavengers could come and clean up. And so the job only took a few minutes. They go back to the car and he casually manages to leave the shovel stabbed upright into the roadside to mark the location. On the drive back into the city, the airman is almost euphoric, relieved. The boss keeps reassuring him all the way back into town, just waiting to get out of the danger zone that is the desert. As they pull into the city, the boss has his airman pull into an all-night drive-in diner and then pays for burgers, fries, and shakes. When the meal's almost done, he tells the kid, "You know what you've got to do, son. You know I can't do it for you." The guy kind of nods, walks over to the payphone, and calls the cops to confess. Yeah, the instant that they said, left her in the desert, I was just like, oh man, she dead. I was 17 and my father and mother traveled to the countryside for their 21st wedding anniversary. A few hours after they left, I got a call from my father saying he needed me to do something for him. The serious tone he used made me say, "Sure, absolutely," without knowing what he was about to ask. He told me to go out to the front where there would be a wrapped present on the foot of the driveway. He told me not to open it, look around to see if anybody was watching, then put it in my car and drive it to a commercial waste dumpster up the road and throw it out. I then had thoughts like, is my father a drug dealer, and has he gotten himself in trouble with some gang? I asked what the hell was going on, and he just reiterated that he needed me to do this for him without any questions or opening the gift. I did exactly as he asked. I picked up the gift, made sure nobody was watching, and threw it out into the appropriate dumpster. I never
found out exactly what was in that box and never opened it. However, shortly after, my mother became suspicious of him having an affair. After, my father denied it, but his story unraveled over time. He was found by my mother in bed with another woman. My mum, shortly after, attempted self-deletion. They then both involved myself and my brother in painful attempts of pitting us against one parent or another. I later found out the box almost certainly just contained pictures of my father banging his mistress, whom he is now married to. I don't speak to my parents much anymore and moved interstate. I'm not sure if this person is English or not based on the way they wrote mum, M-U-M, and the talk of the countryside makes me go, oh, this person's totally freaking English, but then they mention moving interstate and I'm like, oh, they're American? Or maybe they're an English person who lives in America. Pretty minor considering some of the other stories here, but I have one. During the Dark Knight Rises premiere, me and my friend were close to the front of the line. Our theater was the only showing for the next 2 hours, as the other room had broken down. The people in that line were told that if there was any room left in ours, they'd be allowed in. Slim chance to none, so we start going in, and this guy at the front of the other line looks desperate. We lock eyes, and he gives me a questioning nod. I nod back, knowing what he wants. He walks straight up to me with a big smile on his face and says, "Hey man, how have you been?" I respond immediately with, "Max, good to see ya. Glad you could make it. I'm good, you?" I have no idea if that's his name, but he looks like a Max and he rolls with it. And from there we launch into small talk and shoulder claps as he walks in with me and my friends under the suspicious eye of the usher. As soon as we're in, he veers off and tells me he owes me one. My friends patiently wait until he's out of earshot and ask me, who the heck was that? I shrugged and said, no idea. When the movie ends and we walk out, we see each other, and this time he's with a girl. He hurries over to me and says he got a date with the girl and that this is the best night ever. If I ever need anything, he's my man. Never saw him again. Max was a cool guy. I hope his date went well.
Max does indeed sound like a cool guy. He deserves to be happy.
And it was very nice of that guy to give that guy a hand, I guess. It's kind of funny the things that can happen from a telling look or something, or just a mutual understanding in a single glance. While we were hanging out, my best friend got a call from his girlfriend. Now, she hardly let him out of her sight on any given day, so having some free time to sit around, chat, and play up some games had become a vanishingly rare commodity. But now, on this particular day, she really needed him. She didn't have a car and needed him to drive her and take her somewhere right away. He went, of course. She told him she needed to go to an interview with a college she'd applied for and had forgotten about it, and she needed a ride. My friend took his girlfriend an hour away to the college, called me to chat, and picked her up again a few hours later. It turned out later that she had him drive her to the campus, cheated on him with another guy at a place a few blocks away, and then had her boyfriend drive her home after she slept with this other dude. And that was the story of how my best friend realized he was in a failing relationship. No, wait, he stayed with her 4 more months and rented a place next door to be closer to her before she broke up with him the next day after he moved in, because my friend was in love and she wasn't. That is absolute top-tier harlot behavior. I mean, using your boyfriend as a key instrument in the process of cheating on him is downright nasty.
Been waiting for a chance to share this one. Earlier this year at around 1 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, I get a call from a friend who lives nearby. He was in a total panic, and the only words he could get out to me were, "Dude, open the gate and turn off all the outside lights. Hurry!" Half asleep, I ask him if this is some kind of prank, because you know us guys, fool with each other every now and then. He responds with, "Just effing do it." I decide to comply, still in my boxers, turning off the outside lights. Now, just to add some detail, my house is right next to a traffic circle, so I go outside to the gate to see what's going on, and to my amazement, my friend comes speeding the wrong way around the circle. Halfway into making the turn, he turns off all his lights, turns off the car, and rolls into my driveway through my gate at a serious speed, shouting out the window, "Close the goddamn gate!" About 5 seconds later, I see a police car come speeding by, sirens and lights and everything. As I look back to his car, he emerges with a victoriously smug look on his face, shirt and pants covered in vomit, steering wheel covered in vomit, and the smell of straw rum making my eyes water. He looked at me, I looked at him, he nodded, I nodded. He asked to use my shower and sleep over. 5 weeks later, he totaled his car, drunk driving, and lost his job because he couldn't get to work anymore. Been sober ever since.
And I truly believe it is honestly probably for the best that friend stay the hell off the road.
I used to work at a college and somehow was talked into becoming a sponsor of one of the local fraternities. No Greek letters attached to this frat. It was basically just a bunch of dudes who pooled their extra cash and were legit as far as the small school is concerned. After acting as an adult sponsor for about a year, hell, I was only 24 at the time, I get a late night call from one of the frat members saying, "We're screwed. There is a dude in the house with a piece and he won't leave." I'm kinda drunk and don't really want to get involved. I tell him to call the cops, but he's worried because if the cops come, we will all get expelled. He was probably right. It was a small private Christian school, so I say fine, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I walked across the apartment complex and knocked on Malcolm's door. Malcolm was a gangbanger from way back who, I can say this because I am confident in my heterosexuality, is the perfect specimen of a man. Over 6 foot, over 200 pounds and simply shredded with muscles. I tell him the problem and he says, "Cool, let's go." 10 minutes later, we walk into the party. I ask who the dude causing problems was, find out and point him out to Malcolm. Malcolm walks up to the dude and says, "You need to go." Dude looks up, sees Malcolm and says, "Yeah, man, I was just leaving." The frat took a collection the next day and paid Malcolm's rent for the next 3 months. Malcolm was a bad mother. Maybe it's because they're just good Christian boys at a small Christian school, but it's kind of lazy that they had to call a dude to get one other dude to remove another dude from their party. I don't know how many people are usually to a fraternity. Like, naturally, I don't know. I wasn't there, but the situation just seemed handleable.
A friend who I hadn't heard from in a while calls me up saying he needs $200 and he'll give me $250 by the end of the week. He has his own business and owns houses, so I'm like, yeah, sure. Sure enough, at the end of the week, I get my $250. A week later, he asks for $600 and he'll give me $700 back. Seeing as he paid me back on time the first time, I'm like, sure, why not? A week goes by, no money. 3 months go by, with me calling him once in a while, etc. No money, and he's not picking up anymore. So I go, screw it. I go to his place, call him from my girlfriend's cell phone, and he picks up and says, yeah, he's home. I go to the building he owns where he used to live. He comes over all confused. I ask him for the money. He says all he can give me is $400. This avoiding bullpucky goes on for another 2 months. I go, screw it. Go back to his place again. Says he got robbed or some bullcrap. I think he stopped the chronic and started doing the hardest stuff, to be honest. Anyways, I agree to take his spear launcher, an estimated worth of $600, as collateral for the remaining $300, and while I have not seen him in a long time, I still have the launcher.
Now, it may be debatable whether or not this transaction was actually worth it. You got 4 to 5 months of having to track and nag and follow up this dude for money, but in the end, you got a spear launcher, and cold hard cash is good, but a spear launcher is forever. Kinda silly, but I was at work one day commuting from home in a New York suburb to New York City, and my dad called me. He says, I need a favor, pick up a copy of the most recent Playboy on your way home, okay? I'll pay for it. I asked him, why? And he told me that sometimes when he asks me for things, I should just frickin' do them. Not angry, we're jokers. Turns out there was an article about someone in the wine business that he wanted to read. It was just a bonus that he could confuse the hell out of me in the process. Edit. I can't find the article online, but it was during Rudy Kurniawan's scandal. Check him out. It was apparently a big thing in the wine world, and my dad had done some work with him in the past. Though it would be hilarious if he just wanted the magazine, he did have a real excuse. Now, I don't know about the rest of you lot, but I truly believe that this man's father deceived him and simply wanted a sneaky peek at some Playboy bunnies. I live in a sketchy town with a lot of crime and homeless people. It's practically impossible to exit your apartment without seeing someone homeless. However, they're generally nice, and therefore I'm nice to them too. A few greet me when I walk by because I give them my leftovers sometimes. Well, one particular hobo and I are good friends. By friends, I mean we talked that one time when I was going home from a frat party and he told me I was eyed. Anyway, he saunters up to me one night when I was walking home and asked me to do him a favor. He wanted me to take another route home, but didn't explain why. Now, I typically don't follow instructions from the homeless in the middle of the night, but something in my gut told me to listen to him. Probably because for the first time since I've seen him, he looked sober. So I did. The next day, I heard by word of mouth that a woman was graped minus the G. I don't remember if it was also a murder or not on the route that I was going to take. That woman could have been me. I never saw Hobo Bro again after that. Now, there are 2 reasons why you may have never seen Hobo Bro again, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter.
About a year ago, my roommate asked me to squeeze her boob as hard as I can. I asked her why. She told me to just do it, so I obliged her, and she just stands there with her eyes closed for 5 seconds and then runs out of the apartment door giggling. She denies it ever happened now.
Well, I really don't know what to say, dude, except girls, women, they can be pretty weird sometimes. I thought that this was just going to lead up to her asking you to check for a cancer lump or something.
When I was 14, I was spending an unproductive summer vacation day watching TV. I was alone and was somewhat annoyed to hear a desperately loud knock at my door. As I unlocked the door, my best friend at the time rushes in and nearly pushes me over in the process. He was helping his grandma and attempted to skateboard home when diarrhea struck. This guy comes into my house and absolutely destroys my bathroom. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, not to mention his life. But the guy literally didn't ask, and he didn't need to do so. Human beings should let other human beings poop with impunity, unless it's dysentery or something.
Now I say, the poop with impunity is man's truest and greatest right, passed down from God himself.
My friend and his wife were raging snow snorters for almost 20 years. They have both been clean for 3 years, and at this point, his prostate cancer has returned after being in remission for several years. He had heart surgery about 3 months ago. A few weeks ago, he asked me if I could do him a huge favor. I told him, of course, because he was there for me when I was completely down and out and unconditionally gave what little he had when no one else could be bothered. He said, "You don't even know what I'm going to ask you yet." I told him that whatever he needed, I'd make it happen. Turns out he and his wife just wanted a ride to Hackensack, New Jersey, so he could buy her a wedding ring. They've been married over 20 years and due to their drug habit have been repeatedly pawned and ultimately sold off their wedding rings. Now they're clean and I feel they believe he doesn't have much time left. He wants her to have her wedding ring. I drove them last week. He couldn't get his legs in the car without help. After they went in and picked out the purchased rings, he couldn't get out of the car to get lunch and pick up the rings when they were ready an hour later. It was a huge effort for him to take that ride and walk without his wheelchair. He spent all his savings on that set of rings. I took a few hours from work and we had a picnic in a park in Hackensack. It wasn't a favor or an inconvenience. I felt lucky they asked. When you're bereft of good health, it's a good thing if you have good friends to make the short time that you have as wonderful as possible.
A friend asked me to store some cooking equipment and related supplies. Bowls, pans, cooking utensils, some wine, whatnot. Turns out he'd been getting some as a kind of bonus from his boss. Except his boss's boss wasn't aware of this, and then the police got involved. Felt zero guilt. Got a nice $500 bottle of wine out of it. Then my brother's alcoholic girlfriend drank it one night. Doesn't even remember it. Just wanted more stuff to get her drunk. I will never forgive her. Edit. Since this is supposed to be a no questions asked story, I do have to admit that I did ask one question. When he said he needed me to store these things, including wine, I have a spot, but it's not refrigerated. Is that okay? To this day, he still chuckles about how that was the only part of this favor that I was concerned about. Edit 2. I know some people are probably curious as to what exactly the deal was, so here's a more detailed explanation that I got after the fact. My friend was a chef at a high-end 4-star restaurant. Now, at a place like this, they are really serious about both health codes and presentations. So the amount of equipment they went through monthly was pretty significant. Scratch a mixing bowl, chuck it. Dent in a saucepan, chuck it. Even the slightest blemish on something the customer would see, it's gone. A lot of this stuff wound up with the staff at their homes. That wasn't all of the stuff that wound up at their homes. But the point is more that it's not like this stuff wandering off was really eating into the bottom line. Or at least, that's what my friend and most of the rest of the staff thought. Now, on his own, he probably wouldn't have taken much of anything home past the odd dented, scratched dish and whatnot, but his boss openly encouraged staff to use the employee equipment discount for basic stuff and even the occasional bottle of wine when an employee really stepped up during a busy night or something else. The boss did the same himself, so nobody thought much of it. Flash forward a few months, and one night the boss is mysteriously absent. Eventually, they come to find he's down at the police station
station being interviewed on suspicion of felony theft. Everyone on staff is thinking this is a huge overreaction on some upper level person's part, an attempt to scare the staff straight and kill off the employee equipment discount bonus in one go. Then they got more details. So at the time, my friend had taken a total of 6 of those bottles of wine and thought I was probably abusing things a bit. His boss had taken whole cases of wine. My buddy had maybe 8 creme brulee dishes. The boss had a few dozen. Pick an example of something my friend thought was on the border. The boss had 5 to 20 times as much, and that was just over the last year. So long story still long, they quickly realized that the police investigation was legitimate, and they were all likely accomplices. A few people panicked and tossed all their stuff. Some, like my friend, decided to hide it until things were a bit less crazy. Importantly, nobody talked, so only the boss went down for it.
Damnable sticky-fingered gremlin boss giving me random crap and trying to take me down with him. That would suck so hard. Don't know how familiar you guys are with how underage college parties work, but when the police bust in, usually for a noise complaint, nothing happens. But my buddy was at a party at one of our more sketchy friends' houses, and the police bust in, find booger sugar, and the 3 to 4 cops start trying to process and arrest the whole party. He is luckily in the back. They haven't seen him yet, so he texts me saying to come to that house in a specific spot. Turn my lights off and text him. So I do, and I watch him leap out of a second-floor window and run into my car. And upon seeing the 2 cop cars as I drive off, I ask my first question. That being, what in the figgity yuck? He gave me a bottle of Grey Goose for my trouble. That's a pretty good friend to give you a bottle of Grey Goose for your trouble. My first question would be, where was my invitation to this party? Got a call from a friend at 4 in the morning one night declaring that he needed some help. We both lived in the same dorm at the time, and I figured he was just trying to get in without being seen by the resident assistant drunk, because we were both underage at the time. My groggy butt didn't ask any questions and went down to the side door to let him in. He wasn't there though. I looked around, called his name a couple times, smoked a cig, and went back inside because it was cold as Santa's balls outside. I tried calling him again to no avail and ended up going to his room to see if his roommate knew where he was. Turns out he was in there, naked, handcuffed to the bed with a gag around his neck that he spat out. I laughed so hard I woke the neighbors up, and then they laughed with me. We let him out and he proceeded to tell us this story of this fine woman getting all frisky on him and handcuffing him to a bed. Apparently she was on top, and right before he got lucky, she hopped off, laughed at him, and told him to figure it out when he asked how he was getting out. That's when he laid there for what he said was 3 hours trying to get his phone from his desk at the foot of the bed to his face so he could call. Felt bad for him, but never letting him live that one down. Life's a matter of perspective, and I would much rather be this dude than the guy that got stranded in a desert in the Dodged a Bullet video I recorded. I'm just gonna say that.
People who have been on dead people's computers. Did you find anything you wish you hadn't?
Good friend of mine had a major stroke and went into a coma. Prognosis was not good and the family made plans. Since I was the one that knew about computers, they asked me to go through his stuff and find pictures for his memorial service. 2 laptops and 10 USB sticks later, I wanted to bleach out my eyes. My friend was a great guy, but he was morbidly obese. Apparently had been renting out escorts and such from online forums. They were far from pretty, and thankfully, my friend only appeared in a few pictures, but had his clothes on. Out of about 10 gigabytes worth of images, I was able to find 5 suitable for his memorial service. The toughest part was telling his family that I could only salvage 5 photos. I told them the hard drives were corrupted. Yep, I wiped them. No sense in letting them know what I found. On a positive note, I did adopt his parrot, and till this day, she keeps calling me by his name.
I'm disappointed we did not get a name for the parrot, and I would also be pretty traumatized if I discovered my friend's USB stick full of all of his finagling with ladies of the night. Turns out my brother was writing a novel and a ton of poetry. I always wonder if we should do something with it. I'm not sure how completed it all is, but my cousin who went through it said it was quite a bit of material. I'll seriously look into doing something with this now. I'm not sure if I'll be back in the US until this late summer, but I'll see if my cousin can upload the files somewhere next time she's at my parents' house. There are also piles and piles of notebooks and journals. Again, I'm assuming are his poetry and short story collections. He told me that's what he was writing in the notebooks.
Those would take a while to go through since it is all handwritten. At any rate, he was a bit of a recluse for about 8 years prior to his death. He also had some severe substance abuse problems and an anxiety disorder. So the content/background for his work might be interesting if it gives insight on what was going on during that time. My mom said something that he was looking for a publisher at one point, so it is probably what he would have wanted for some of his works. I have no idea what the brother was writing, obviously, but I think that it's a very nice gesture in a way to honor a dead family member, to find a way to publish that work to some degree, and maybe even that work could go on to inspire someone else in the future in a positive way. A few months after my wife passed away, suddenly, I finally got around to cleaning out her PC and laptop. I'd barely gotten started when I came across a file that had its file associations removed. She did all the financial stuff, so I had to find out if it was something important. Of course, my first try was Word document, and sure enough, it loaded. Yeah, it wasn't financial. Turns out she'd written a list of lifetime goals that she wanted to reach, and it had been updated only weeks before she passed. A list of about 30 things she'd dream of doing, and only about 4 or 5 were crossed off. I didn't get much done after that. So I tried to find the file again per people's request, but I was not able to locate the file. I'm not sure what I did with it. Drank away most of my memory of that time, to be honest. But off the top of my head, I remember some of the more mundane things on the list. She wanted to buy a house, travel the world, start her own YouTube channel. I remember the most recent update was that she'd crossed off wanting to meet Alton Brown, which she did at a book signing just a short while before it happened. I remember she made sure to bring her nutmeg with her in case he asked. That would probably make me profoundly sad if I found that, but I would also hold the hope that they felt the same way as the dead wife from Up did, the whole "you were my adventure." Also, I have no idea who Alton Brown is, but apparently there's some kind of American TV host chef personality.
Not on the computer, but my family found a 3-ring binder my grandmother kept. It was full of lusty love letters. We asked one of her best friends about it, and she replied with, "Oh yeah, I was supposed to burn that." Apparently my grandma and this guy had a relationship where they never actually got together, but had a lot of frisky phone conversations. None of that is quite so bad, I guess, unless you start imagining that it was your grandma. She described many details of their talks in her letters and referred to it all as her year of passion.
God damn, Grandma. Good for you, though, girl. You do you, man. Just, damn. My father died a few years ago from colon cancer. Even though I was only 19, my brother was significantly younger when we lost him. He was 7. My father and brother would watch a movie usually every other night. And a few months ago, I finally got around to cleaning his computer. I looked through his folder where he downloaded movies to, and the last film he downloaded was Spirited Away. And it was the night before he passed away. Needless to say, we watched it together that night. Good film, definitely fits the story and the whole, theme of death we got going on in this subject, but I'm more of a Porco Rosso guy when it comes down to Studio Ghibli films. That one is my absolute favorite. TLDR, dead brother's computer, possible self-deletion. Wish that I hadn't found that he had already erased his computer history. When I was 18, I took my older brother's computer after he died in a car crash. He was the sort of guy that people loved to be around, always laughing, joking. He made people feel good about themselves. His car had run into a grouping of those cement Jersey barriers on a road under construction. No other cars were involved, and there were no signs that he had hit the brakes. He must have dozed off. While emptying his room in his house, we found a set of crumpled papers. They were the unfinished first sentences of self-deletion notes. But he never left a completed note, and instead chose to throw these drafts away. Maybe he sat down to write a note, decided he didn't want to die, needed some air, went for a drive, got into an accident. I couldn't understand how this happy, great guy that I loved could be so unhappy. So I searched his computer for any clues. I was prepared to look in every corner for a clue, an internet history, an AIM log. This was back in the day. A photo, an email, anything. There was nothing. Not just nothing strange, nothing at all. He had already wiped his computer clean, probably anticipating that his little brother would inherit his computer and snoop around. It still doesn't confirm or deny anything for me. I feel certain that he intended to go through with it, but I've never been more upset to find absolutely nothing. Man, I completely understand why that would be conflicting in a way, man.
TLDR, priceless memories, creepy smut. Oh good, this story. So my uncle took buttloads of pictures just all the damn time. We didn't actually realize the scale of this until I had to look through them all after he died. Turns out we could have lost every single picture of me, my sister, my cousins, and still we'd have a remarkably smooth transition from infant to adult in picture form. That said, we also discovered he liked smut. So much smut. And since we didn't want to accidentally throw away some priceless picture, I had to go through 3 hard drives and a couple hundred USBs and CDs of almost entirely smut. Now I was more impressed with his capacity to find and organize things than anything else. 4 gigabytes of name time-stamped videos and pictures of trans women with freakishly large breast implants urinating on men. We have the USB for that right this way.
I'm just gonna say, they said themselves that this uncle who died was a very organized individual. I'm sure they would have separated that stuff from those things. And honestly, it's like, at a certain point, morbid curiosity is all the excuse you need. It's like, if I found that, I'd be like, okay, how deep does this rabbit hole go? But hey, I ain't judging.
That's a goddamn lie. I'm judging everything.
My boss passed away in his sleep just over a year ago. He was young and it was unexpected. I helped his boss get into his computer at work and also his laptop from home to retrieve insurance, banking, investments, etc. information for my boss's family. It was very eerie in that I found my boss had a lot of the same tastes in music, TV shows, movies, etc. that I had. Visited the same websites, etc. I felt like he and I could have become much better friends if there'd been more time. I ended up getting almost everything for them. There are a couple of Excel files with financials that were password protected. I ran some brute force programs against them for a few weeks, but eventually my boss had me shut it down and then it was over. And so now I sit at his desk on his computer using his mouse and his keyboard and do his job. I like to think he's out there somewhere, watching over me, and that he'd be happy with what I've done in the last year. I hope so at any rate. This one is a little odd because either he already respected the crap out of his boss and then found out about their common interests, but it seems more like, in the way that they wrote it, like I said, there's a lot of context probably missing from this, so don't take me as like, a hard truth or anything. But it seems like upon finding out that they had a lot more in common than they realized, he formed a parasocial relationship with a dead man. 9 years ago, not a personal computer, but my local library has a set of computers in there and people can get usernames and passwords and use the virtual desktops, given they have a library card. This old guy would use the computers a lot. I wasn't nosy, so I never looked in depth, but he was using a word processor, so I assumed he was typing letters or something similar. Anyway, I volunteered there over the summer and I had to close out inactive library cards, or ones that had paid dues. Basically, this meant I was deleting accounts by logging onto their virtual desktop and cleaning them out. The old man showed up in the lineup. Turns out he died a few months before. I opened up his desktop and went to documents because curiosity got the better of me and I wanted to see if he had anything some relatives wanted or something. There was his life, encompassed in 2 folders. Folder 1, novel. He was writing a memoir of his tales in World War II. Folder 2, Missy Missy. From what I could collect, was his wife. In it were dozens, if not over 100 documents of love poems and letters to her. I backed them up on a USB and intended to return them to his wife. I'm sure she would want the love letters. As it were, the wife was dead and he was buried next to her in the cemetery. I was sad, because these were letters to his long-dead wife. She had died in 2004. I gave the files to his son, who read them out loud at the old man's annual memorial mass as a eulogy and testimony to the love of his wife. Well, it might have made you sad, but it made me happy, because guess what? The greatest thing you can have is a love that transcends the bounds of life and death. My girlfriend and I used to play Pokemon a lot. I still do, actually. But she passed away in a car accident a year ago. One day I opened up one of her games because I was feeling down and I noticed her main player was named after me and all her Pokemon were nicknames after pet names we gave each other. The thing is, I did the same thing in my game, but we never told each other. Short and sweet, I love it, but it vaguely, ever so vaguely reminds me of the Animal Crossing comic about the dead mother. Absolutely melts my frickin' heart. God, look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. No, but I got an old computer from church once. They upgraded and donated it to us. It was filled with horse smut. I don't go to that church anymore. I say, may the Lord have mercy on the horse smut-loving heathen that resided in that there church.
Well, I sometimes help out at a charity that ensures ladies of the night have access to condoms and can reach out to police if they suffer violence, etc. At one point, we threw a fundraiser that sold art created by a former or occasional lady of the night and showcased the art of one deceased woman in particular, who I believe was about to begin transitioning to a man. I was given her hard drive through a friend of the family that worked at the organization and asked to retrieve what I could of her art and her life. My memory is a little fuzzy on most of this, but I think her death happened in the early 2000s. She had a fairly large Napster directory, and I think it was a Windows XP machine. To be honest, I don't think I found anything I wish I hadn't. Instead, I found a trove of beautiful art and a small window into someone's life. She was both a hobbyist and a professional photographer who had a webcam she made good use of. I saw her travels to India and South America. I saw friends of all shapes and sizes, mainly muscular and heavy tattooed, and action shots of her and her girlfriend. She had an active social life, and in most ways, she was just like the rest of us. I feel odd typing it, but I would have felt very voyeuristic if she were still alive. As it were, I didn't worry much about it, and instead thought of it as a very serious responsibility. I guess ultimately I found a reminder that even people who do work that's derided or considered dehumanizing by some still lead normal and wonderful lives just like the rest of us, with the same struggles and joys and trials and tribulations. I'm glad I got to experience it.
Why did I give you such a doofy voice? Whatever, this next one's kind of depressing. TLDR, found my grandfather's writing on how much he hated my grandmother. When my grandfather passed away, we were going through his computer to save off important things. We mostly saved off genealogy information, but found one very strange item. My grandfather had written a book/thesis on how much he hated my grandmother. It was about 150 pages long, had a table of contents and all sorts of hate-filled stories and anecdotes. My dad shared it with one of his brothers, and they waited about 5 years before showing it to my grandmother. I'm still not 100% certain that she ever needed to know about that book. One of my family members printed it out and mailed it to all of my aunts and uncles. My dad is one of 7. It was a huge drama fest for years. It seemed to have died down lately, though. 150 pages. A table of contents entirely dedicated to your hatred for presumably your wife. My God, the hatred in this man's heart is unfathomable. It is so strangely cruel and yet oddly sensible at the same time. I mean, he didn't murder her or anything. And plus the question is, was she bad? Was she so bad that it was warranted that he wrote this book? Just my God, this strange and yet beautiful world we live in. What the hell?
Made a throwaway for this. This is my first time posting on Reddit. I had to get this off my chest. I knew my father had a vibrant internet life. He had been in IRC for a long time, maybe starting in like 1996. He had been a regular on the one channel for about 10 years. I think he was a mod or whatever the equivalent was. He talked about his online friends a lot. They seemed like great people and they were supportive when he got sick. After he died, I wanted to make sure they knew, but I wasn't sure how to get in touch with them. About 6 months after he died, I got a Facebook message. The sender said they were looking for a woman with my same last name who lived in my town. She was a regular in their chat and had cancer, and they were worried about her. Approximately my father's age with the same kind of dog. The dog picture he sent was not my father's dog, but it looked similar in a photo of my father's very distinctive truck. After being in some shock, I realized that my father was doing some serious catfishing. He had posed as this woman for over a decade. Honestly, she sounded nicer than my father in a lot of ways. He sometimes had a major temper and could be a total butthole. This group of people really loved this woman in their community. I didn't know what to tell this guy. I wanted to tell the truth, they deserved closure, but if I lied and said she died, it would raise questions. Why was there no obituary, etc.? I did not want them to feel betrayed either. After thinking for a few days, I told him. He seemed really confused, but honestly not terribly upset. He said that he was sorry for my loss and hoped I would visit the chat sometime. We would keep the secret between us and he would tell the group that she died, but not the whole truth. I think this was the best way to handle it, but sometimes I regret it. I don't know what my dad would have wanted.
Strange yet beautiful world we live in. Seriously, kids, be careful who you talk to online. You have no idea who you're talking to at any point on the internet. It could be anyone with any intention. They could just be messing with you for an entire decade for no other reason than just because they can. I don't know. I am honestly just shocked that this person, the online chat friend of the father, took it as well as they did. I would have to go away for like 10 minutes and process and then reply maybe.
Yeah, my uncle's laptop. We powered one up and there were all these weird selfies taken from overhead with him lying on his back. He was a gargantuan old shut-in / hoarder, so they looked really weird. And then there were all these hardcore twink smut videos and stills. This was odd because he had always been straight to my knowledge and kind of a homophobe. Yeah, I know, it should have been a red flag. And then it hit me. He was taking selfies to put himself in the picture, so to speak. Decades too late to be a twink. He was an old man trying to imagine he was young, beautiful, and able to explore something he couldn't have done in 1950s Texas. Before he died, he had become fixated on a couple of memories of friends coming on to him in swimming pools, etc. I now understand that he was fantasizing about missed opportunities to have fun. There was also an account for some kind of meetup site for guys. All old guys. I had to email the site and tell them this man is dead. We don't have a charger for the other laptop. I don't know what we'll find on it.
Utterly traumatizing. I don't know why I dedicated myself to such a stressful voice there. I was kind of trying to go for like the old lady, the wrinkly like stick of an old lady in the chocolate episode of SpongeBob, I guess. Anyway, I would be exceedingly careful about opening that second laptop. You might get Raiders of the Lost Ark if you open it.
Several years ago, a distant relative died and left their computer password protected. My grandma gave the computer to me and said that if I could pull everything off the hard drive and give it to his wife, he had a lot of finances and other important stuff on there, I could keep the computer. So I set to work, ended up just writing a script to brute force it since I had tried every combination of birthdays, pets, etc. I could think of, and my script found the correct password after 3 days. I find what one would normally expect. Finances, a ton of family pictures, assorted documents for work, some fairly tame erotica. Now you might be thinking that's what disturbed me. The fairly tame erotica. No, actually. What disturbed me was that I found in a subfolder of a folder on his desktop labeled 2001 resume. In that folder was about 11 gigabytes of lolicon smut. Keep in mind this was like 2008, so that's quite a bit. I searched the rest of the computer and found no trace of real CP, so I just ignored it since lolly is more or less legal. Didn't see any reason to drop this on the rest of the family, so I omitted it from the copy I made for them. Kept a few DVDs of the stuff though in case it ever came out that he had graped minus the G a kid or something and nuked the drive. Considering I was like 11 during all of this? Holy crap, that was a shock to see.
I'm aware I said earlier that, yeah, I would look at stuff out of morbid curiosity if I was there, but as a rule, I would generally rather not be the go-to guy to go through a dead relative or anyone who's dead's old laptop files and stuff. I just don't want to be in that situation. Also, what was up with the 11-year-old genius?
A relative of mine, 40M, told me this story. His roommate in university was a very quiet person. Several years ago, his roommate got into an accident. He lost pretty much 10 years of memory. One day, my cousin found a USB belonging to his roommate in his bag. He phoned said roommate's parents. The parents decided to come and pick up the USB. My cousin, not being able to resist temptation, looked through the files. He found plans for a self-deletion note, a journal about the roommate's depression, and draft of a very sorrowful please come back letter to said roommate's former girlfriend. My cousin, looking at the joyous, blissful, loving post-memory loss picture of roommate, straight up formatted the USB. My cousin told me that he believed that his roommate would be better off without these memories.
Now that is a juicy goddamn story. Now I gotta say, I've always been kind of like, is long-term amnesia really a thing? I'm sure it is, but it's one of those things where because I haven't experienced it personally, there's just a degree of skepticism I have towards the whole concept where it's like, really? The memories are just gone? It's not like they're in little glass containers that shatter and then the memory dissipates into the air and up into the goddamn stratosphere and it's gone forever. It's somewhere in your noggin, you just can't freaking remember it. I don't know, it's a weird thing. It's so hard to explain because I don't freaking have it. Hopefully you understand what I mean though, in terms of the skepticism of it. If someone told me they had amnesia, my immediate conclusion would be they're screwing with me. This was such a weird, funny topic to do. I mean, all the people's actions, I have to question some of their reasonings for keeping some stuff and looking at things and whatnot, but what a funny one to do. What does your family do that you didn't realize was bizarre until later on in life? Okay, so my mom was a pretty crappy parent. She didn't really teach me a lot and I was left alone most of the time. Most of the things I learned were from my cousin because she paid her to watch me while she would go to work or be messed up somewhere. I don't know. Never took me to an amusement park or anything. It was all my cousin. Anyway, as a kid, I firmly believed in Santa Claus, and that was because my mom didn't buy me jack as a kid. It was always my cousin getting me things and taking me places, and for Christmas I would always get really good things. Like I would get a PS2, games I really wanted, a stereo, etc. $700 a month disability money because I'm disabled. Anyways, for those reasons, I firmly believed in Santa Claus, and I remember vividly kids in middle school telling me it was my mom, and I 100% did not believe in them to the point I started crying about it. All the cool gifts were from Santa as well, by the way. All the gifts my mom would get me were socks, shirts, etc. My mom also reinforced that Santa was real. Hell, I believed in the Tooth Fairy for the same reason, since I'd get $5 for every tooth I lost. Fast forward to just recently-ish, I'm 26, and I find out all the gifts from Santa were from my cousin and her mom. They would give my mom gifts for me every year, and every year my mom would take off the name tag and replace them with Santa. I even remember her telling me how specifically my cousin and aunt didn't get me any Christmas gifts while growing up. I feel like she felt inferior or something because my cousin cared more about me and got me expensive gifts. When I grew out of the Santa thing, I actually believed my mom got me all those gifts and was using my disability money for them. Cause like, every year I'd get a ton of good stuff. It now makes a lot more sense. My cousin always knew what stuff I liked cause we liked the same things. I even remember the year I got a GameCube and how whenever I'd go to her house, I'd want to play her GameCube to play Harvest Moon. And that Christmas, what game did I get with my GameCube? Harvest Moon. I never told my mom I wanted Harvest Moon. It was only my cousin that knew, so I fervently believed it was Santa that knew I wanted it through magic or whatever. Really bad that my mom did that to my cousin and her mom, but this isn't even the worst thing she'd done. I could write a book about how terrible a person she is. So I wouldn't have said the mom was that bad until they mentioned that they were actively hiding the cousin and aunt were buying them gifts. That bit was like, ooh, okay, maybe she is that bad. Because not buying luxury items isn't a terrible thing. That's what it is. It's a luxury. It's not a basic necessity or anything like that. Because basic necessities, when you get older, you realize that's what matters. When you're a kid, you're all about the PlayStation 2. When you're adult, you're like, oh yes, socks and underwear for Christmas. Ooh. Maybe more context is needed, but yeah, it does sound like they kinda sucked.
To keep me from watching too much TV, my dad told me that we had a 1 hour limit on our TV viewing. As in, we paid for 1 hour of TV per day, and any more than that we would be charged extra for. Like AOL back in the day. When I started going to friends' houses where the TV was always on, I got a bit suspicious, but I just figured they had more money than we did. Eventually, after watching TV for hours and hours with one friend, I asked her how much TV they paid for, and she just looked at me like I was nuts. So I guess lying to your kids because it's easier than getting into a fight over a rule you want to enforce is the bizarre thing my family did.
I'm of two minds on this one. One, obviously it's not good to lie to your children. 2, I don't blame them if they wanted them to get away from the TV and go out and be active and stuff, because a prevalent issue nowadays is people having too much screen time. Like, I see some parents out and about, they hand their babies mobile phones and stuff. It's like, what the hell? I understand if they've got like learning programs on there or things specifically for them, but I just don't think it's very good for their development. I don't think kids should be raised on technology. I only got a phone. Granted, I got a phone in like 2006. I got a little flip Nokia. It was a basic phone, had nothing else. That's all I used it for. But now I just feel like phones and tablets and stuff, when they just hand it off to their kids, it just feels like they're trying to distract them and not engage with them or teach them anything themselves. You're supposed to be there for them. You're supposed to engage with your kids, for God's sake. Anyway, that's just a little rant I've got, I guess.
Having no shame being nude. At least in America, that's weird. Granted, my father was not wandering the house nude as he has all daughters, but my mother, 0 craps given. My sister, mom, and I just have no shame. I'm eating breakfast. Mom wanders into the kitchen naked to do her neti pot thing. I'm trying to take a bath. Here's mom or sissy trying to have a conversation. Walk into mom's bathroom. Literally every door leading there wide open. Mom taking a bath. Stop and have a chat. Same with my sister. I've had so many damn bathtub conversations with my sister and mom. Also, my mom's total nonchalance about being naked around my best girlfriend. No, they weren't uncomfortable. She asked or warned them. She just wanders around naked sometimes. So now I'm just always naked in my own home. Blinds open or not, I literally just don't even notice. Being nude is just my inherent natural state.
I mean, TMI, but if absolutely no one is around and whatnot, yeah, it's pretty nice to walk around in the nude, but like when there's company about, it's like, well, it's a bit weird, yeah, like that's my standard, you know, I'm not gonna enforce my standard on people, but, you know, kind of weird.
Yeah, my boyfriend found this super weird and gets upset that I don't close the bathroom door all the way. He had 4 cats and my parents had 4 daughters with 1 bathroom. Privacy while you pooped was just not happening. I'm almost 30 and still find myself wandering into the bathroom while my mom's doing her thing when I visit to chat. It's just our normal. Also, my dad never wore pants when he was home. Tidy whities and a shirt is how most of my friends met him. I remember one of my sisters pleading with him to put on pants because her boyfriend was coming over, and he was just like, I pay the mortgage. I don't have to wear pants, which has become my life creed.
You heard the man, love. He pays the mortgage. Now, I agree, though. When company is coming around, just put some freaking trousers on. Here's the thing. Here's the rule. Shirtless, all right. Pantsless, nah, that's a no-go. Not when company's about.
When I was younger, my whole extended family, except the ones in Germany, would share a farm together and go there on the weekends. We would spend the whole day weeding, raking, other chores, and goofing off outside. And at night, we would eat only potatoes and gravy, and the men would drink beer. After that, all of us kids would go into the living room and watch VHS tapes of adult movies that were probably too inappropriate for us to be watching at that age. We would do this till 11 while the adults talked and played games, and then we would all go home as my grandmother and grandfather were the only people who lived there permanently. That farm has been in the family for a long time.
That sounds like a damn good time, a hootenanny even. I'd love to go to a farm and, like, you know, get drunk with my relatives, talk, play games, drink beer. I mean, maybe not beer, I'm more of a cocktails guy and all that. Or watch inappropriate movies and stuff. Like, I don't know if he meant, like, you know, adult movies or he meant more like just inappropriate films for kids, like Final Destination, or as I would be watching when I was, like, I don't know, 10 years old, From Dusk Till Dawn. That's a great film. I freaking love that movie.
My mom would let me and my brother run around naked for about 10 minutes before our bath, around ages 2 to 3, so we wouldn't want to take our clothes off in front of company, because she read that some titles do that, but creating a time to be naked stopped it, I guess, and she didn't want to risk it or something. And she also would give us our popsicles in the bath or shower until we were about 4, so she could just hose us down and we didn't get everything sticky while eating.
I don't actually blame her. Lollipops, anything like a popsicle or a lollipop, you gotta be careful with kids. I know until the age of like 5 or 6, I think, I could not be trusted with a lollipop. I would get sticky. I'd be holding it at arm's length, and then next thing I know, what the hell's going on with my hair? Why is my hair sticky? I didn't put it anywhere near my head. My hair's all sticky, and my mom and my brother would be all, get your rollers out, Edna, because I had long, gorgeous blonde locks, and they'd get all curled up and sticky and horrible. I'd hate it. I'd cry even. When we watched movies, we would discuss what was happening, what we thought of the characters, or just random things that we thought of during the movie. When I would watch movies at my friend's house, they found this very annoying, and I didn't realize people just sat in complete silence for 2 hours. I have since broken the habit, mostly, but when I meet up with my family, it's the same as it used to be. I also do this with very specific people that are down for it. I have a friend who I watch a movie and a bunch of anime with on weekends and stuff. When we have the time, we get together, we just watch random stuff. We've been watching Back to the Future. We recently watched Homeward Bound, which was a lot less sad than I thought it was gonna be. He wanted to make me cry. And we just comment on things, make jokes every now and then. It's just a thing that we do. Otherwise, though, I am perfectly fine to sit in complete silence while watching a film. Cult stuff. I didn't know it was a cult until I became an adult, grew up in a Christian group. They had their own church and school. I wasn't allowed to talk to people from outside both church and school my whole childhood. Even neighbors I got in trouble for. This is the kind that teaches you homosexuality is evil, Pope is evil, Obama is evil, Trump is evil. Hell, I got a detention for using female hair products because it was gay, and that was 2011 in Canada. It was crappy, I guess, but the time I tried to self-delete with a bottle of whiskey, my parents' response was to ground me for life because I went and partied. I told them why I did it. They sent an elder from the church to talk to me, and the grounding remained. They had their own business too, so at 16 you'd work and get paid normally for the church folk. Being an adult, I left, but I had no clue just how sheltered it is, and how crazy sheltered I was as a kid. 20 is when I got away, and it was like this magical adventure world where nothing was like it was supposed to be. That sounds like utter hell, and although this was about Christianity specifically, I want people to remember no matter what part of the political or religious spectrum you are on and what you believe in, if you are too dedicated to a specific ideology in which you put it before the people around you, the people that care and love you, you're going to taint, corrupt, and hurt those around you, and probably just ruin any impression that people have of you and what you believe in, and that goes for everyone.
Not brushing teeth. We were never taught to actually make a habit out of brushing our teeth growing up. Our parents didn't either. We used to get shown those fun educational videos in school when we were kids. The ones with the big cartoon toothbrush who tells you how to brush your teeth. But I never actually took them seriously. I thought toothbrushing was just something people on TV did, not an actual real thing, until my first sleepover with a friend around 5th or 6th grade. We were getting ready to go to sleep and I looked at her like she was crazy because she was actually brushing her teeth. And she looked at me like I was crazy because I wasn't brushing my teeth. I didn't have many sleepovers as a kid, so I just put it down to sleepover weirdness and carried on not brushing my teeth until I started getting tooth pains in my late teens. Went to the dentist. He asked when the last time I'd brushed was, and I swear he nearly fainted when I answered. Safe to say I brush my teeth now, but a less gross one, maths. When my siblings and I were little, our mother used to make up maths worksheets for us to do. She'd sit down and handwrite a bunch of simple, real simple, we were kids, maths questions down. Give us a sheet each and just let us work through them. It wasn't forced or anything though. We never had to do it, but we wanted to. It was like a game to us. We'd ask her to do it for us. I didn't realize that not everyone's mother would do that or read to them each night before bed. Even my first teacher commented on how much further along my reading was than the other kids when I first started school. I thought this stuff was standard until I started talking to other kids about it and realized nobody else in my class did it.
Save for the disregard for oral hygiene, which by the way, kids, seriously, brush your teeth every day. Make sure your mouth is clean and healthy. It is important. You can get sick, and I think in some cases you can even die if your mouth is really badly kept. But that's the extreme. And on the other hand, though, these parents are clearly engaged in wanting to teach their kids stuff. I mean, that's a problem that I've talked about before, I think. A lot of parents just aren't engaging with their kids and actively trying to teach them stuff. I have a close personal friend who was a primary school teacher for a while, and she told me about a couple kids who didn't have major learning difficulties or anything, just didn't know how to wipe their butts because their parents just didn't bother to teach them how. Neglect is a form of abuse, people.
When I was a kid, we opened all of our Christmas presents after dinner on Christmas Christmas night. All of my friends open them on Christmas morning or sometimes even Christmas Eve. But we waited with all of the family, including grandparents and aunts and uncles and the whole damn fam. Dinner was eaten, dishes were done, drinks were served, and we all sat together for several hours and opened Christmas presents. I don't do that with my own family now, but I do kind of miss the tradition.
I frickin' love Christmas. Christmas frickin' rocks. I'm not like fanatical about it, but I like it. I love the atmosphere, the snow, the goodwill, and cartoon Christmas specials back in the day absolutely rocked. My mother is a member of the Slavic pagan cult. In my childhood, there was nothing strange for me in bloody sacrifices for different gods. It was a bit of a holiday for me. In the courtyard, we had an altar where mother often performed rituals. However, in the end, my father could not stand this pizdiets and broke up with her. But now I can easily write fantasy books on the knowledge that I received in my childhood. I even tried in Russian. I am from Russia, but I am not very good at composing stories. And no, it had no effect on my mind. Unless I'm not so worried because of blood, death, etc. I am not cruel. I have quite normal relations with people around me. Now I am 22 and I am IT student, and of course I am not pagan. By itself, the sacrifices were hens, pigs, and other livestock animals. Most often they were not for the fire god, so most often this event ended in a feast.
I actually once went on a date with a woman who claimed to be a practicing pagan. I mean, paganism itself is an umbrella term for a few different things that have either been discarded or forgotten, and people don't really talk about that much openly, but I don't know, the whole concept seems kinda cool to me. All different gods respecting nature and all that.
I don't know if it's bizarre, but my parents had arguments in front of us when we were kids. Not knocked out, drag out fights or anything, but they disagree and hash it out verbally, sometimes loudly. Now that I'm married and have grown-up friends and such, almost my entire social circle never saw their parents argue or fight.
I'll be honest, I have witnessed some awful arguments and fights between my parents, but I do know someone whose parents literally never argued in front of them, and they are simultaneously the least confrontational but also most dangerous person I know, because they literally study the way of the blade. They do Bushido stuff. The man can roll into a stance while holding a samurai sword and slash that thing out smooth as butter. I have held his katanas. They are authentic and sharp, and I also had the honor of attending his daughter's christening very recently. Confrontation is an inevitable thing, people. You should be prepared for it in all manners, whether it just be an argument or whether it be someone actually trying to cause real physical harm to you. Because some people just freak out over the most mundane things, and you know what, maybe that's part of the reason why. Your parents didn't argue enough in front of you. It's a regular thing that happens. Arguments can sometimes be the way that you can solve problems.
I had a less than traditional upbringing due to my 2 juvenile delinquent older sisters, but despite all of that, my family has always been very full of love. Every goodbye or goodnight was always accompanied by, "I love you." It wasn't until I started dating my now husband that I realized not all families do this. He'd get off the phone with his mom and just say, "Bye," and I'd be shocked at the rudeness of it. He's adopted the habit with me now because I've never stopped. I've always felt loved by my parents no matter what was going on because of the constant effort to remind ourselves that we love one another.
Solidarity, sister. I literally do the same thing with my family and even my very close friends. I believe that anything can happen. I could be snatched from this existence at any point for any reason. So I let those around me who I truly, deeply care about know that I love them, even if it might be a bit embarrassing for them when I say it to them in public.
I just realized today, probably not that strange, but my family would go to the movie theater when we knew it was going to be a rainy or stormy day. We would go see a movie and then look at the weather, and if it was still bad outside, we would just hop into another movie. I never knew it was wrong or anything. I was like, sweet, we get to watch more movies. Never got caught as I remember, but I'd never be bold enough to do it now.
Sneaking into a film isn't the worst thing I can think of, but I have never done it and I don't intend to, because I have a lot more respect for my local establishments. Because the fact of the matter is, people, if these places don't make money, then they just disappear, and then suddenly, oh, you live in a food desert, or oh, there's nothing to do. And then a big shadowy corporation buy up the property for a cheap price and then build houses. They own the houses, price up those houses, and people can't actually afford to buy them, and then they're renting those places forever.
Men were considered inferior and violent. We weren't allowed anything resembling a weapon, including army men. Weren't allowed violent toys, no sugar, very rarely allowed time with friends. Most mornings I'd wake up to find I was grounded for one reason or another, along with my brother, and we were locked in the room all day. Food and water twice a day, bathroom at the same time. No blinds or curtains, no beds. We were allowed a mattress. If we were allowed outside, it was to do chores, usually the more physical ones like weeding or picking up rocks. I still have panic attacks if I feel trapped. When I stayed in the hospital overnight last year, they were kind enough to help me walk around so I wouldn't stress out, but it was a bloody awful experience. Anyway, I assumed all families were absolutely horrible and this was pretty normal until I actually spoke to people about it. My grandmother raised me, and I keep this light orb thing I made of her ashes as a nightlight to remind myself that even the worst pieces of crap can be useful. I defer back to my comment earlier about how extreme ideologies can really corrupt, taint, and harm people around you. But always remember that you have the opportunity to be better than the people that hurt you.
Happy one. My parents combined their last names without a hyphen, so we have a unique name. It took me a while to realize other people existed with my friends' same first and last names. It really weirded me out. Mildly happy one. I was raised not to argue with my siblings, and it was forbidden not to get along, so we got along. Not as happy. I thought everyone's parents would just take random bins of their precious things, including clothes, pajamas, toys, books, etc., and put them in the basement and never give them back, even when they said they would. Very unhappy. I thought everyone's parents would scream at them if they ever asked why they were doing something or ever said anything the parent didn't 100% agree with. Maybe everyone does do this, though.
Well, that certainly went from happy to sad to me lamenting that some people just should not be parents. Obviously, this person's parental figure lacked any and all emotional maturity where they couldn't even handle their child disagreeing with them.
I grew up in a Christian subculture known as Mennonite. A lot of the ways I was raised would be considered bizarre. No TV, no internet until I was in 6th grade at least. No going to the movies, bowling alleys, or skating rinks. I wasn't allowed to wear shorts. And no other worldly styles such as Christian rock, rap, etc. My mom wears long skirts and a covering on her head and is often mistaken for either a Catholic nun or Amish. We had a whole laundry list of do's and don'ts. At the time, it didn't seem bizarre because that's all I knew. Of course, I knew others were different, but that was of little consequence to me. That said, I value my upbringing. I was raised with a strong work ethic and a fantastic moral foundation, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I like that this guy takes the bad with the good. He doesn't directly deride the Mennonite thing or even say that he doesn't live by it anymore. It's kind of up in the air. He doesn't say. But I think that this kind of calls back to the guy who doesn't brush his teeth, but yet his parents still taught him maths and English and stuff where they're clearly engaged with him on a level where it's like, yeah, those parents are good people, and yet they have a blind spot. They just didn't care about oral hygiene. But it doesn't mean they don't love them or anything like that. I mean, kids, here's the thing. You're never going to have all the answers in the future. There's always going to be a blind spot or you're going to mess up or something, and that's the way parents are. It's just a fact. My mom raised me on her own. I remember realizing that, wow, my mom doesn't actually know what she's doing. She's just doing her best. And I've turned out okay.
When my little brothers were babies and they needed to poop, my mother would pick them up, plop them on her lap, and hold them over the trash can in the kitchen. So she'd just be sitting on a chair with the trash can in front of her, letting their turds plop out their butts in full view of us. It's a lot easier than cleaning a dirty diaper later. The weird part is doing this even when I had friends over. They don't come over anymore.
Maybe it's because you sound like a little gremlin, man. No, kind of gross, but I understand the logic. I just, learned to wrap a nappy, though. There's a road tunnel about 20 minutes from where we grew up. It's about 2,000 yards long, and when we drove through it, we all had to hold our breath. No other tunnels, just that one. I thought everyone did it and was surprised when I found out they didn't. Also, if you bring someone a present from your holiday, it's referred to as a rabbit. Again, I was surprised that it's just our family that does that. This isn't a family thing, but when I was a kid, I used to hold my breath whenever I saw like a character in a cartoon or a video game underwater and try to hold it for as long as they're underwater, because my logic was if I can hold my breath for as long as they can underwater when I'm in this situation, I'll be fine because I've been practicing. No, it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't work like that. I remember doing it while watching the Tarzan cartoon. I think it was the episode where Clayton's sister comes and wants revenge for her dead brother.
Teachers, what was the best excuse for being late that turned out to be true? Story time. I was the only high schooler on our bus one winter. The other detail important to this story is that we had the oldest model bus that wasn't in the best mechanical shape. It had one of those mechanically operated doors, it would shoot out a plume of black smoke every time it started, and just looked much less fancy than all the other buses the school had. Anyway, one winter it was so cold that the diesel engine stopped working. The bus driver said the cold made the diesel in the lines gel up. I have no idea if that's accurate, but either way the bus wouldn't start. Fortunately, we were only 5 miles from the school and all the kids had been picked up already, so they just radioed another newer bus to loop back around and pick us up. The bus driver radioed the elementary school but completely forgot to let the high school know. So I show up to class and the teacher asks why I was late. I said, the cold caused the fuel lines to gel up in the school bus, repeating exactly what the bus driver told us. But I was the only high schooler on that bus, so no other students were there to back up my story. The teacher didn't believe me, and instead of just calling the main office to verify the story, she mocked me in front of the whole class saying, "It's not possible for fuel to freeze in the cold," and everyone in the class agreed with her, saying that I was a bad liar and laughed at how dumb my story was. Ultimately, the office did let her know about the bus after she tried giving me a detention, but the embarrassment is still there and she never gave me an apology. I don't really blame a lot of teachers for being skeptical about excuses kids make for being late and stuff, but the fact that they didn't even bother to check if there was a situation with the bus is really unreasonable. Also, yeah, apparently fuel lines can start to freeze up and everything, or the fuel inside the lines can freeze up if it's about minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I was the kid. Physics, 11th grade. The day prior to this day, my neighbor passed away and her son was a friend of mine and also in this class. Terribly long story, but it was a self-deletion by hanging, and I was the one who found her. I had nightmares all night and skipped the first half of school the next day. When my physics teacher saw me later, she asked me where I was that morning. Before I could explain, she said, "That friend was looking for you and concerned. He seemed more worried than he should have been and was a little upset about you not being there. The guy's mom died, but he still went to class and didn't tell anyone, but was worried about me. I couldn't tell her what had happened at that point, so I just said I overslept." Well, first of all, that's traumatizing. Second of all, it's nice that he didn't say anything when his friend obviously didn't want to say anything quite yet. And third of all, there aren't many of these from the perspective of actual teachers that I could find, so I expect a lot of I was the kid in these. Obligatory not a teacher, but I am an admin in a music school. I had a mom frantically call me and let me know her daughter would probably be late or miss their guitar lesson in a couple hours because she couldn't find the kid. I was just kind of okay, well, I will let her teacher know. Got another call about an hour later from the same mom. She found her kid, but apparently the daughter went to a friend's house and decided to dye her hair green? They lived pretty close by, so I did let them know they could still come in for their lesson. Mom said she would call me back and let me know in a minute or two. Never called back. Her daughter showed up for her lesson about 5 minutes late with this bright green coiffure. I gotta admit it looked rad as heck, but also kind of a confusing thing to be an audience to the build-up. I don't know about the rest of you, maybe it's just me, but I'm kinda over the whole unnaturally dyed hair look. It's cool, I don't mind it, but I know so many people still who are "Oh my god, blue hair, oh!" And I'm dude, are you is it 2010 still? Are you still in love with Ramona Flowers from Scott Pilgrim? One of my friends was training for cross country on a weekend once and she was hit by a pickup truck that ran a stop sign. She flew over the top of it and broke both her kneecaps. The pickup truck drove off. She said she can't remember any of the events that happened immediately afterwards, but the police report said that a bystander pulled over to help, and when they asked if she was alright, she just kept repeating a bunch of letters and numbers over and over, not even saying anything else except JHP 887, JHP 887, JHP 887, JHP 887. Just constantly saying it like she was in some manic state. Eventually, after the police had already been called, the dude who pulled over to help realized that those were the license plate numbers and wrote them down. There was no security footage of it, and her being able to glance at the plates was the only reason they were able to track down the truck that hit her. To this day, that is the single most awesome thing that she's ever done. I can't imagine flying over the top of a truck and having enough mental capacity in that moment to look at the license plate and memorize it while having two knees that don't have functioning kneecaps. I wish there was a silver lining to this story, but she had to have tons of surgery and to this day has some bad knees and can't really run like she used to. Not to mention the guy they tracked down didn't have any insurance and was just an elderly man who had pretty severe dementia and panicked after hitting her. So they didn't even press charges. Because of the way that they told this one, it doesn't really seem to fit in this topic. I have to commend the woman, first of all, for being able to memorize the license plate through the shock and the pain that they were probably enduring in the moment. And I guess they missed the cross-country race in the end, I assume, so I guess it counts. I apologize that I'm writing this on mobile, so there might be errors. I'm an English professor, and one year a pretty good student showed up without one of his 2 major term papers. He explained that his safe had been stolen by a contractor who was working on their house. His laptop was in the safe, and that's where his paper was. I genuinely believe him because he is being a really good student. Then, over the next few weeks, he started to show up to class looking very tired. He said that he was on a hunt for the person who stole his safe, and he was spending late nights with his cousin driving around looking for the guy because they knew his van. Now the student and his cousin were both recently back from tours in Iraq and had seen combat experience. They wanted to find the guy to beat the tar out of him and get the safe back because his wife's wedding ring was in the safe as well as a bunch of cash. He rewrote the paper and turned it in apologetically that it wasn't up to his usual quality. But he still kept coming to class looking like he hadn't slept. After a little while, he came in very happy to my office and he reported that he found the guy after a long search that involved breaking into a drug den, shaking people down with baseball bats, and even bribing some prostitutes. He said that they found the guy's van at a Taco Bell after getting a tip from a prostitute, and they cornered him and waited for the police to come. I read in the news that he had in fact done a citizen's arrest and stopped the guy at a Taco Bell, and that they ended up calling in the Secret Service because he used the cash that he stole from the safe to buy a bunch of counterfeiting equipment. Secret Service apparently investigate counterfeiting, so the whole investigation happened because this guy, who I dubbed the White Shaft, tracked the scumbag down through the bad side of town late at night to get a wedding ring, some cash, and his research paper back. It all turned out to be true. He got the ring and the laptop back. I gladly accepted his original paper, and it got a much higher grade than the rewrite. A couple people asked for more details, so here are a few more. I can't recall the year this happened, but it was the height of the war with the US and Iraq. My student had enrolled in the army right after 9/11 on the same day as his cousin. They were both just out of high school and enrolled due to patriotism and frustration. According to him, when he started his vigilante spree, he actually went inside of a house used by a drug addict to try and find the guy. They shook the house down with baseball bats and forced everyone out into the street. When the cops showed up, they told my students how dangerous this was and not to do it again. They then gave him their card and said, "But call us if you do." They shook down at least 2 other drug dens, and the same cop was waiting outside both times to arrest people, since he didn't need to get a search warrant as everyone was outside now at the point of 2 baseball bats. I told my student about how dangerous this all was, and he was very John Wick about getting his wife's wedding ring back. Also, I tried to find a link to the story, but it was a small story and the Googles aren't being very helpful, especially since I can't remember the year. What a nerd, going through all that trouble to get a good grade. No, I'm joking, obviously. That story is awesome, and if there was a link they could have supplied to an article, I would have been so happy. Not a teacher, but my senior year of high school, they were doing construction on the building, and so part of it was completely closed. To make up for the lack of space, there was a vocational school nearby in the district that let us use the extra rooms they did not use. To get to the other school, you could get on a bus, or if your last class of the day was at the vocational school, you could drive over there. I was driving a friend and myself over to the same English class. Traffic gets pretty stop and go at this time, as there's a lot of buses and students all going to the same place. The kid behind me wasn't paying attention during one of the stop moments and rear-ended me. Now it was stop and go traffic, so it wasn't like any of us were going fast. It was really just a bump. Still,
everyone got out to see the damage and make sure everyone was okay. We were all fine. We both had piece of crap cars. We both decided that nothing was significant. May as well get back into the line of traffic and get to class. The kid who hit me was also in the same English class. My friend and I walked into class late. The teacher was known for being a stickler. Very snidely says, "You two better have a good reason for being tardy." My friend laughs and I respond, "Yeah, other classmate just rear-ended us on the way here. You can confirm with him when he gets here." So a minute later he rushes in saying, "Sorry I'm tardy, I hit CM Hooley and friend." Rest of class laughs, stern teacher makes us all get down to business, the end.
I always say you should treat teachers right, but it's undeniable that either some teachers are waiting for you to slip up or actively want to get you in trouble. I mean, I once had a teacher that said to me after I questioned her teaching method, "I'm going to make your life a living hell." Took me outside away from the class and said that to my face. I had a student, player our NCAA Top 25 football team, be late to a college midterm. As a note, we are in a metropolitan area. Emails me and goes, "I fully understand you think this is going to be a lie, but I found the guy unconscious in his car. Had to stop and call 911. Be there soon." This was one where it was so wild I couldn't fathom it being fake on some level. I was sitting there proctoring and thinking how I was going to have to request a police report to verify. But the kicker is the guy made it to class and finished the exam on time, and got an A from what I recall.
Good Lord, he a football player, got a little big smart brain in that head of his, and he's a moral person. My God, he sounds like the whole package.
TLDR, student shows up to class with a head injury with a note to prove it. Chooses not to go home because he doesn't want to miss the activity for that day. I teach a college freshman paper writing class. Over the course of the semester, we have 2 workshop sessions where students bring in their drafts and critique each other's draft papers. Each one counts for 5% of the grade, and missing it on excuse means forfeiting that 5%. An excused absence makes the other workshop session worth 10% of the grade. Anyway, during the first workshop session, there was a student who I did not expect to be absent at all, but 60 minutes into the class, had shown up. Class is 90 minutes long. Normally, I wouldn't allow someone to come in that late, especially to a workshop session. However, he had the best excuse. He gives me this letter from a doctor at the PE department. Turns out that he had judo for PE that morning. He was paired up with a more experienced sparring partner who flipped him upside down. He landed on his head, I think. On the symptoms, the note read that he had temporary memory loss and a possible concussion. Under recommendations, it said that he should go home. I asked him why he didn't go home. He said that he didn't want to deal with the complications of missing workshop. I should note that my class was on the 5th floor of a building with no elevators and high ceilings, so he had already gone up 4 flights of stairs. I didn't want to waste his efforts, so I let him push through. He mentioned that he couldn't remember where he put his pen, needed to write comments on classmates' drafts, so I begged to one of his poor classmates to lend him one. Afterwards, I went to our faculty room and told them about it. They all called BS, and I showed them the note, which completely changed their tone. They all started accusing me of creating a pressuring classroom environment. Half joking, I think. Just want to clarify the timeline because I realize it might have caused some concern. The judo incident happened in the morning around 9 or 10 a.m. My class was from 4 to 5:30, with the student arriving 5-ish. In the time between the incident and the student arriving late to my class, he was able to rest, regained his memories, although possibly not totally since again, he couldn't find his pen, was cleared from having a concussion by a doctor. The doctor wrote the note to explain why he would miss classes because the recommendation was that he go straight home, which would mean taking public transport for about an hour. He was still wearing the judo pants and he still did a good job critiquing his classmates' work, by the way. I once judo through a dude, he poured milkshake all over my friend, called me a homophobic slur, and tried to punch me in the face, and I totally emasculated him in front of his girlfriend. That was in like early high school, like 2007, 2008.
Not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school, I remember an incident where I had a homework sheet I'd taken home to complete. I can't remember what the subject was. I do remember I spent most of my evening after dinner sitting at the table with my dad trying to complete it. This was torture. For some reason, my dad and I never connected in a learning environment. He would dictate things to me and expect me to get it, but he really struggled to walk me through the process needed for me to understand it. So after many hours of yelling and arguing and tears and being absolutely miserable, I finished the damn worksheet, set it down and went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to discover a critical error with my homework. When I set it down to get ready for bed, I had set it on top of the bird cage instead of on top of the shelf next to it. I don't know why I thought to do this instead of putting it on the shelf. I can only assume I thought flat surface good in my poor tired brain. My cockatiel was greatly offended by this mysterious new object on top of its home and had spent most of the night shredding my worksheet to pieces. I took the remains with me to school, and when they asked us to hand in the assignments, I kinda just looked at my teacher with a completely defeated expression on my face and uttered the words, my bird ate my homework. The uproar of laughter from the class was defeating. My teacher took the sheet from me and examined it carefully, then sighed as he tells me, "Well, it looks like you tore this page apart with a hole punch. Come see me after class." I didn't expect to be accused of lying, so in my shock I started arguing with him. No, really, my bird ate my homework, which only spurred the laughter from the class further. I didn't know what else to do. Did you ever get that frog in your throat feeling as a kid, where your voice just seizes up and you can't manage to squeeze out any sound no matter how you might try? For years afterwards, I'd get bullies making stupid "did your bird eat your homework again" jokes from kids that had been in that class. Adult me thinks it's kind of funny. I have pushed myself, been pushed by my dad so hard just to complete that damn assignment, only to have it ruined, be accused of lying, and be embarrassed and teased for the situation. Poor 7-year-old Lanko just wasn't prepared for life yet, you know? While I've never had a pet eat my homework, I have had my brother drink a liquid science assignment that I had in primary school, but I don't believe I was ever accused of lying about him drinking it, so that kind of turned out well for me.
Monday, my astronomy professor walked in unusually late. He was out of breath and apologized and said, "I swear I'm late for a good reason," and went on to inform us about Betelgeuse, a star that has been dimming more than usual and has been debated between astronomers as to what this dimming business is all about. Some are saying maybe that's just what it does, and others are saying maybe it could go supernova. Well then, he says in what felt like a single breath, so I read an article that came out today, and some researchers suggested that Betelgeuse could be spewing out enough matter to make clouds that are interfering with how much light makes it to us. But they hadn't looked at the observatory data that corresponds to that phenomenon. So I looked over the data and found out that they were wrong, and it can't be a cloud that's causing the dimming. So I was writing to them to tell them their hypothesis was incorrect and to show them the math and data that reaches that conclusion. And he had this smile on his face like he was so proud of himself. Ended it with, "So now y'all are the first to know that it is definitely not a cloud."
I don't know about the rest of y'all, and maybe this is just my personal experience, my personal opinion, but science teachers are the most passionate about their work, I find, and in turn, that makes them the cutest, in my opinion. I teach at a community college on the Texas coast. We reopened as soon as possible after Harvey, and the excuses were insane. Someone stole our door/air conditioner/tires, and we're waiting on the police. That could take a while. Travel was hazardous in some areas. Our hot water heater exploded and the shower completely melted. We just got back into our house and it's full of snakes and seagulls. My grandmother is missing. Some teachers complained and adopted stricter attendance policies, but several of my students were homeless or living without electricity or running water and still taking time to stay in communication. So I ditched my attendance policy entirely and basically said, "I'm going to be here regardless."
regardless. If you can be here, great. If not, let me know you're okay as soon as you can, and I'll count you present and tell you what we went over in class. I'm proud to say that almost all my students finished the semester and most did very well in their exams. I teach psychology and I start the semester with writing assignment on stress. It gives me insight into the lives of my students, so I'm not often completely floored by odd excuses.
Sounds like a pretty rad, understanding individual.
Not a teacher, but I hear a lot of tardy excuses. My work is pretty flexible with schedules. We let people write their own work hours with start times. You can change your schedule on a whim so long as you put in 80 hours during the pay period, 2 weeks. So I, being the supervisor, had to have them check in with me when they arrived. It was so stupid. My guys have always been honest about when they were late and made up the time without question. Still, we had a couple months of them checking in on arrival. Even if someone was 1 minute late, I was required to document the reason and provide a course of action. I said screw that and put up a board for people to write in their times, excuse, and when they plan on making up the time. The excuse field was always there, so people would write in something every day. Coffee was still good to waste. Recovering from taco last night. Couldn't find clean underwear. Saw a cute redhead on the bus and decided to watch where she got off. Nothing ever came of it, and rules were lifted after a few months at my request.
Sounds like a pretty chill, reasonable dude. I wouldn't mind them being my supervisor, although I would definitely recommend you check into that guy who was looking where the redhead got off, cause that sounds semi to most definitely kinda sorta stalker-ish.
What was the worst time you walked in on someone?
I was living with my grandparents when I was about 19 years old, and I came home early one day from work. I walked into the bathroom and saw my grandfather, who was like 80 at the time, butt naked, staring at himself in the mirror. He was smiling and shaking around his schlong. After we both made eye contact, we both said, "Oh crap," and just turned around. I'll never forget that image in my head as long as I live.
Traumatizing, but not that bad. When I was 8, I walked in on my dad banging my mom's best friend in my bed. She was babysitting and he was supposed to be at work. They were loud and I went to see what the noise was. My dad screamed at me to go away, so I got out of there without actually seeing them. I told my mom when she got home and she ended up spending the night in jail for breaking her best friend's nose. When she got home, she beat the crap out of my dad with a baseball bat. Wasn't the first or last time he cheated on her either. I got an awesome new Princess Jasmine bedding set out of it though. I just want to go on record that infidelity and abuse are a big no-no, and this kind of behavior really messed me up mentally growing up. Hope asked for the worst, so I gave it and tried to be entertaining about it. And yes, the sheets were to replace the ones my dad banged on. I still stand by my statement that Princess Jasmine is awesome.
Well, that's a twofer right there. First you walk in on your father cheating on your mother, and then the spousal abuse? Whew. That's pretty bad.
I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 guys, so it was 2 guys per room. I usually left first because of my job. One day I realized I'd forgotten some important documents and came back to get them. I opened up the door to my room and found my roommate laying naked on his bed, legs up in the air and blow-drying his balls. He later explained to me that he had some sort of jock itch and needed to keep that area moisture-free. That image is burned into my brain to this day, and on his birthday, every year, I send him a picture of a blow-dryer.
Look, itches in tender places are just, hell, I don't blame the dude, but lock the door, put a note up or something.
Demoisturizing balls. Knock, please. So I'm out tent camping in a state park. It's early morning, maybe 6-ish. I need the restroom down the path. I grab my shaving kit, start walking the 500 yards. About halfway, I hear a noise and look to my left. Directly into the eyes of a dude hammering away at his girl doggy style inside their tent with the door open. I pause, kinda shocked. Dude waves at me. I wave back. Girl looks up. She waves. I wave back. They continue banging. I continue walking.
I guess they just really wanted to be fully in touch with nature. Like if they're leaving the tent door open and everything, they wanted to be seen.
I, 25F, was being towed around a house I was planning to rent a room in from Craigslist by the owner. The last bedroom door was closed, so he knocked and opened the door to reveal a husky man with headphones on, aggressively beating off. I still rented the room.
I'm reminded of that meme where Hank Hill walks into the room. I freaking love King of the Hill, by the way. And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought this was a... Oh, good Lord!"
I didn't personally walk in, but my mom did. I was told to stay outside. I was about 15 and me and my best friend along with my mom went shopping and we came home to see my brother's girlfriend's car parked in our driveway. So me and my friends were all like, oh, you know what they're doing, and my mom was brushing us off. She told us to wait outside and went into the house and quickly came out covering her eyes repeating, I saw nothing. She caught my brother and his girlfriend mid-act in the living room. My mom was mortified and me and my friend were thrilled we were right.
Doesn't matter how traumatized the mom is from seeing her little boy being a man, it just matters that you were right.
A walking in story from a party I was at when we were all about 17 to 18. A couple of hours in, everyone had turned up except one of the birthday girl's best friends. She eventually calls and says she's out at a club and can she bring the guy she's met, whose name is apparently Sketch. Half an hour later, they turn up pretty drunk. After about 15 minutes, we realize they have vanished upstairs. Birthday girl doesn't really want them fooling around in her bed, but no one wants to walk in on them either. So we send the drunkest guy up to call them down. He toddles off upstairs and then about a minute later comes back into the living room looking pale and distraught. He sits down. We ask what happened.
I went upstairs and opened the door, and he was going down on her. And then he looked over at me, and I think he was a vampire. There was blood all over his mouth, so I left. Turned out they started fooling around and it became clear it was her time of the month, but Sketch decided to power on through. We accidentally sent up the one person who in a drunken haze was not mentally equipped to deal with this at all. He looked broken for the rest of the night. Can't say I blame the guy. That probably would have kind of ruined my night as well.
So, this happened last semester, but I got home around 11:30 p.m. and no one was home. I'm like, alright, whatever. I go to my room, throw my stuff down and grab my water bottle. I walk into the kitchen to fill it where the front door is, small 3 BDRM apartment through the school. And in walks this girl. I'm like, what the hell is this girl doing in my house? We make eye contact. I realize it's my roommate in full drag. Fake boobs, wig, high heels, all of it. All he says is,
I can explain.
already having seen a lot of this kid's oddities, I just say, don't bother, you do you, man. And I just went to fill my bottle and continue to play Civ or something the rest of the night. He now occasionally just chills in drag and talks makeup and clothes with my other roommate's girlfriend. I'm riding this sitting next to this 7-foot unicycle propped against the wall. It's been an interesting year to say the least. Disgusting. Utterly debaucherous. I cannot abide by a 7-foot goddamn unicycle. 4 foot is the max that a unicycle should be. You'll break your goddamn neck riding that thing. It's just impractical. TLDR, I'm probably in a smut video online titled RA Interrupts Gay Threesome. What happens next you won't believe. I used to be a resident assistant. I was doing room inspections with my partner, RA. I had given all my residents over a week notice, taped a letter to their door alerting them that I would be coming around. Everything was going fine until we got to room 312. I still remember the room number to this day. We knocked on the door 3 times with no answer. I announced that I was keying into the dorm. We get inside. Everything's normal. I go to the individual bedrooms and knock 3 times again. As soon as I announce I'm keying in, my residents open the door in just gym shorts. Hey, what's up? Live Legacy? Just doing our scheduled room checks? Oh, okay, come on in, without even hesitating or giving me a warning on what I was about to walk into. As he opens the door, I see a naked man dart across the room and into the bathroom. I didn't know he was gay, so that was surprising. But then I walk into the room and look to my left. I see a tiny Asian man was standing in the corner with a laptop in front of him. He was only wearing a cheetah print thong. I quickly avert my eyes and look to my right, and I see a camera on a tripod. I dart out of there, immediately yelling, "You passed, have a nice day." They could have had kilos of booger sugar in the corner and I wouldn't have cared. How on earth did this one not get gold? This one was hilarious.
Didn't really walk in, but the most traumatizing time, when I was 6, I had friends over for a play date and I went to go hide underneath my grandparents' bed with my friends. My grandparents came into the room after us, so they had no idea we were in there, so they started undressing and went on the bed. Sound started. I started crying, but they were basically deaf, so they couldn't hear me. But my mom walked by the room and thought she heard me crying, so she walks in. Grandparents start screaming at my mom. Mom starts screaming at my grandparents. I run out from under the bed with my friends trailing behind me. It was awful.
That is basically the exact same thing that happened in an episode of F is for Family, which is a hilarious show. Another, not walked in, but my parents divorced when I was a baby. I ended up living with my dad and got very sporadic visits from my mom in my hometown of hers. I lived half the country away from her. One summer, in the first few days of a visit to her town, I thought I was alone in the house. I was 15. My siblings were several years younger than me and out playing with their friends, and my stepdad and mom, I thought, were at work. It's hot outside, my stepdad is a tightwad, so there was no AC in the house. I decided I was going to go upstairs and soak in a cool bath for a bit. Since I think I'm alone, I start shedding clothes as I'm going upstairs instead of waiting to get into the bathroom. As soon as I reach the top of the stairs, my mom jumps out wearing nothing but a lacy thong and yells, "Surprise!" Turns out my stepdad was supposed to be home early that day, and since I had only been there a couple of days, she assumed the heavy footsteps coming up the stairs were his. So there was a very surprised, almost naked 15-year-old looking at a very surprised, naked 32-year-old who also happened to be his mom. We talked about it one time several weeks later just so she could explain, and it hasn't been mentioned since. For you weirdos, no arms were broken, I was repulsed, not aroused, and I guess you would have to ask her many partners over the last 4 decades if she was hot. I'm not mad at y'all though, this is what makes Reddit worth my time. It's like a double KO in a fighting game, only with trauma.
Double trauma. I was 12 at a sleepover with a good friend of mine. It was around mid-afternoon. I was getting myself some water when I come back to see my friend getting lectured about how messy his room was. It was immaculate. And how he should take responsibility for things. He did. His dad is pulling up carpet fuzz and yelling at him for it. My friend is crying. I kind of pretend that I didn't walk in on that and hung out in the kitchen reading cereal box ingredients. As soon as the dad walks out, his girlfriend comes in through the door in tears. She had totaled her Corvette running a red light, and now the boyfriend was hysterical, yelling at her and us. They go to their room and there's this banging and fighting noise. Then everything was normal. Took me bloody forever to realize they were addicted to booger sugar. The dad and the girlfriend sound like absolute tosspots. That's all I have to say on that, really.
I went on a road trip with my family when I was like 13 or so. We stopped overnight at a motel and my mom asked me to fill the ice bucket with ice from the machine down the hall. I grabbed the bucket and went off to fill it up. When I got back, I had the terrible realization that I didn't remember what our room number was. Starting to panic, figured the only thing to do was to pick a door at random and hope for the best. I picked a door. It was the wrong door. An old man answered wearing nothing but tighty whities, a wife beater, and black dress socks. Behind him, 2 other similarly clad gentlemen sat on the bed next to 3 old ladies in negligee. I asked them where the ice machine was, even though I already had ice in the bucket that I was holding in my hands. He pointed down the hall and I said, "Thank you," and took off. I guess my mom heard me and opened the door to wave me back in. I was only off by a few doors. Worst episode of Showcase Showdown ever.
And then you have to sit there and wonder what they're doing a few doors down from you the entire time. Awful. Technically, I didn't walk in on this situation, but bear with me. Something I liked to do when I was very young was bring shoes into the different rooms of the house. I was always very proud of myself and wanted to show everyone that I brought more shoes indoors. Once, I had the brilliant idea to hide in my parents' closet with a pair of shoes so I could surprise them with my ingenuity of now hiding shoes in their closet. I made this, what I thought to be at the time a very well thought out and super professionally planned scheme. Step 1 of my plan was to set into motion my getting the shoes and bringing them into the room with me undetected. This proved to be an easy success. Step 2 was supposed to go a little something along the lines of show them the shoes once they came into the room, etc., etc. That is where my plan goes all wrong. There I was, sitting in the closet waiting for my parents to re-enter their room when I finally heard the door open. Just as I got my stuff together and was ready to leap from my hiding place and bombard my parents with shoes, I froze. I heard my mum moaning and stopped in my tracks, not knowing what I was supposed to do. Now my plan had been disrupted. So I peeked from the crack in the door of the closet to see what was happening and saw my parents getting it on. I didn't know what to do and knew that it would be more awkward for me to open the door and leave than just sit and wait for it to be over. So, logically, I sat and waited. When my parents left the room, I waited a bit before leaving the room myself and pretended it never happened. A specific individual sounds more like they're a dog with the ability to use a keyboard with a Reddit account. Probably late to the party, but I'll post anyways. I was the one walked in on. In high school, I snuck out of the house late at night to meet some friends. And let's just say I was very hungry when I got home. So I raided the kitchen pantry and took the only two edible things that were ready to eat: plain tortilla chips and plain Hershey's chocolate bars. I go up to my room and start eating the chocolate and chips. Mind you, I sleep naked and it was a little warm in the house, so I'm naked on top of all the blankets, and with the state of mind I was in, I was making a pretty big mess. Crumbs and chocolate bits getting all over my chest. Well, then I pass out. Here comes the problem. I have always been hard to wake up. We're talking now I have to set 12 alarms every morning for work. So every morning my parents, Mom until this incident, would come to my room, open my door, turn on my light, say time to get up, and close the door. Turning on the light was the only way to get me out of bed. So, my poor mother comes to my room to wake 17-year-old me up, and as a 17-year-old boy who is just waking up, I was fully erect. Doors open, lights flip on, and there is her son laying like a dead starfish on his bed, chips, crumbs, and melted chocolate all over his chest with a raging boner. Not only that, but from her angle, she is staring right down the devil's alley at my taint, balls, and boner. So she screams at the top of her lungs. This scares the crap out of me, so I wake up and start screaming at the top of my lungs. Now she's kind of running in place, flapping her arms around, screaming. I'm screaming naked in horror in my bed, and my dad comes bounding over thinking something is wrong and bursts the door fully open. He yells, "Oh, what the hell!" I try to yell, "Get out!" and cover myself, but really just manage to yell, "Grrr!" as I rip the blanket up and fall off the bed to the side. Breakfast was quiet that morning. I'm going to use the Devil's Alley in the future. That was funny as hell.
I would just like to preface I was 5 years old. I was at a campground and headed over to a friend's camper to wake her up in the AM. I walked up to the loft area and shouted her name. Turns out she was in the room to the left, not the right. Her cousin shot up out of bed, staring right at me like my holler was a fire alarm. This wouldn't be worse until you consider she had a glass eye that apparently drifted inwards while she slept. I had no idea who this woman was or what was up with her eye, but I screamed, "No!" the second she opened her eyes. I ran 90 miles per hour that morning back to my place. The worst part was my naive reaction, clearly.
I know a swath of very different people, but I've never met anyone with a glass eye personally. Yet. Or as far as I know. Not sure if this belongs here, but it's a nice departure from all the 18+ related stories already posted in the comments, so here goes anyway. This happened in 2005. I was 21 years old and working my first full-time job during university vacation. One day, my boss allowed me to go home early, so I raced home excited and looking forward to an afternoon enjoying the epic summer weather. I parked my car in our garage, and as I walked through the 2 interleading doors into the kitchen, I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps running down our passage away from me towards the 3 bedrooms. I knew my 19-year-old sister was home, so I just assumed that what I'd heard was the sound of one of the many female friends she regularly had over. She was a total socialite, running away from me. I figured maybe said friend had been slightly undressed or something. I don't know, I didn't have much time to think because what happened next happened really fast. A few steps later, and I'm in the dining room from which the rest of the house fans out in 3 different directions. Then I see my parents' bedroom door at the end of the passage open up, and my sister sticks her head out and screams at me, "You mad though? Get out, there are 2 guys in the house." As she says that, she slams the door closed again. And then, sure enough, 2 black guys appear from one of the bedrooms off the passage. They're both slightly younger, maybe 19 years old and much skinnier than me. Bizarrely, my first instinct was to negotiate with them to get them to leave. I think the reason for this was that both looked as surprised to see me as I was them, and it was clear that they hadn't planned for this, so I think I figured, well, now that they'd been caught, they'd readily leave. My only thought was to get them out of the house. At this point, I still didn't know what my sister's condition was, whether she'd been hurt or anything. On my way there, I'm also trying to figure out how I'm going to open the door to let them out because I've left my house key in the kitchen where I came in, and there's no key nearby to open the locked steel security gate. Before I get the chance to even make a plan as I reach the entrance hall, suddenly both guys jump on me and stop me from going any further. I grab onto the door frame for dear life, and right about now I notice that one of them is armed with a huge knife from our kitchen. Oh crap, I think. I'm about to feel what it's like to get stabbed, but by some miracle he doesn't stab me. Now I'm screaming for help louder than I've screamed in my entire existence, hoping that I'll be loud enough for someone to hear outside the house and bring help. And in the meantime, these 2 guys are trying harder and harder to pull me off the door door frame. My shirt tears in half and I sprain 3 fingers from the strain of holding onto that damn frame. Then a moment of clarity. I remember that there's a panic button linked to our armed response company right outside my parents' bedroom. I scream my sister, press the panic button, and I hope she hears me because I'm all out of ideas and all out of hope. Then I hear her shout the last thing I wanted to hear. I can't. I'm tied up. The panic button is mounted at like shoulder height on the wall. In that moment, the most dire sense of panic and fear sets in. People say about scary moments that I nearly shat myself, and suddenly I almost understand what that means. I can feel my butthole puckering uncontrollably while I wonder what the hell is going to happen to me now that nobody is coming for help. Just as I'm giving up hope, the house alarm starts wailing. It is loud, so loud it physically hurts my ears, and the siren is mounted in the ceiling right above me and these 2 thugs, so it is super uncomfortable. I scream at the thugs that the police are coming. I noticed that they looked almost as afraid as I am. They let go of me and run down the passage. Turns out they left via my bedroom window. I later learned that following my scream for her to press the panic button, my sister was somehow able to sort of shimmy her way up the wall from a prone position to where she could reach the panic button. I also learned that frighteningly, thanks to recent home renovations, the wire in the room next door linking the alarm system to the phone line had been cut. So although the alarm went off, nobody was coming to help. Fortunately, the 2 thugs didn't know that. This whole episode must have taken no longer than maybe 2 minutes tops, but it felt like it went on for a half hour. Anyway, seconds later, there's a knock on the door. It's my friend Bruce popping over for a visit, and I'm still in such shock at that point that I can barely think straight enough to let him in. But I did, and it's lucky he was there as he went to find my sister and untied her. Fortunately, she was unharmed, although she was convinced that the 2 had planned to grape her and that the only thing that prevented it was my early arrival home. We immediately called the cops, who arrived very quickly along with a volunteer trauma counselor. Our armed response guy and an armada of the other security companies and agencies in the area. They are all linked to the same radio network and all assist each other very effectively. In spite of the police's genuinely best efforts, by then it was too late and unfortunately, the 2 thugs were never caught. On the plus side, my folks immediately bought a new house in a much safer suburb far from that one, and within a few months, we were out of that hellhole of a suburb. And also, it forced me to take stock of my personal safety, so now I'm far more aware and I'm far more prepared should anything like that ever happen again. God forbid. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking the same thing right now. I want to hit the gym so goddamn hard right now. It's these kind of situations that you need to be prepared for. And having a home invader, 2 home invaders, is probably absolutely terrifying, especially when you've got family that you don't know what their condition is. Like, I can completely understand why this dude's mind just went completely blank, why he reacted the way he did. I know I'd go absolutely berserk if there was a stranger in my house, stealing my stuff, trying to hurt my family. I don't frickin' know. But then again, in the UK, you're not actually allowed to defend yourself, it seems, from people who are trying to commit violent acts against you because our laws are, well, I can't use that word, but I'll say stupid, and you can think about what I actually wanted to say. Anyway, try and stay sharp, be ready for people who try to mess you about, hurt you, whatever. Hit the gym a little bit, do a bloody boxing class or something. I did frickin' Jeet Kune Do, and frankly, this has put me in a foul mood all of a sudden.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.